Hi guys, and welcome to History That Makes You Sleepy. Tonight you arrive just a little too late. A thin layer of ash drifts slowly through the air, settling softly on your shoulders, light as snow but warmer than it should be. You brush it away without thinking, only to notice how quiet everything is. No footsteps, no distant voices, not even the sound of wind. Just a stillness that feels unnatural. You take a slow breath and there is a faint, bitter taste in the air. It lingers longer than expected. You pause. Because something here does not quite make sense. And the more you notice, the clearer it becomes. If you were truly standing here, you would not have time to understand it. You probably would not survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to share your location and local time in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where in the world you are listening from. Now dim the lights, flow straight into the story. You stand on the edge of a remote frontier road, if road is not too generous a word for two frozen ruts, wandering through black spruce pale grass and low hills glazed like pottery. The ash on your shoulders is not volcanic, though your tired mind briefly wonders. It is from a burn shelter farther along the track, a place where someone tried to keep warm, tried too hard, and left only a smudged square of earth and a few stones wearing white collars of ice. The air is cold in that old frontier way, not simply low on a thermometer but personal. It touches your ear, slides beneath your collar, and finds little places in your clothing where modern comfort would normally intervene. Unfortunately, modern comfort is not riding with you tonight. No heated seats, no weather app chirping smugly from a pocket, no roadside diner glowing ahead with coffee that tastes faintly of cardboard and salvation. There is only the road, the storm that has passed, and the storm that may still be gathering somewhere beyond the trees. You arrive after the first freezing rain has done its work. Every twig carries a sleeve of clear ice. Every branch bends under its strange crystal burden. The world looks delicate, but that is exactly how it tricks you. Ice storms are beautiful in the way a locked door is beautiful when you're on the wrong side of it. The trees glitter, yes, but they also crack without warning. The ground shines, yes, but each step asks whether you would like to remain upright, or perhaps become part of the landscape. In the 19th century, travellers across the North American interior Siberian tracks, Patagonian routes, and high frontier passes often feared freezing rain more than honest snow. Snow could be shoveled, packed red, and sometimes crossed with sledges. Ice was sneakier. It wrapped wheels, sealed reins, weighted tents, and turned familiar paths into polished traps. A mainstream fact worth keeping close tonight is that major frontier travel depended less on heroic speed than on stopping at the right moment. Survival often belonged to those who recognized delay as wisdom. Very glamorous, of course. Nothing says adventure like deciding not to move. You take a step and your boot sole whispers across the crust, not crunches. Whispers. That is bad. Good winter footing speaks with texture. It complains, grinds, squeaks, or breaks. This surface is too smooth, too pleased with itself. Ahead a line of poplars leans over the path, each branch coated so thickly that when the wind finally returns the whole grove may begin dropping spears of ice in the dark. You listen. Somewhere far away a limb gives a wooden groan, then snaps. The sound travels slowly, cleanly, like a musket shot softened by distance. You're not the first traveller to pause here and wonder whether to go forward. People on remote frontiers learn to read warning from absence. No birds moving, no squirrels scolding, no dogs barking from the nearest cabin if there is a nearest cabin. Even your horse, if you have one, lowers its head and breathes steam close to the ground, testing scent and footing with more caution than any official mapmaker ever managed. Animals do not care about your schedule, which is one of their better qualities. The burned shelter tells its own small history. Perhaps it was a trapper's lean place, perhaps a survey camp, perhaps a rough hut built by road cutters who expected winter to behave politely. It did not. Freezing rain may have sealed the roof, smoke may have failed to rise, or a desperate hand may have fed the fire until sparks found dry bark beneath an outer skin of wetness. Frontier fires could be both lifesaver and traitor, and that is a tidy little betrayal to carry with you. There is a quirky old tidbit from winter travel accounts that some travellers believed a sudden ring around the moon meant ice rather than snow, especially if the night felt strangely mild before the cold returned. Was it reliable? Not exactly. But when you have no barometer, no telegraph warning, and no cheerful meteorologist pointing at a swirling blue map, you take your omens where you can get them. You look upward now. The sky's pale iron behind torn clouds. The sun, if it is still there, has become a suggestion, a very unhelpful suggestion. Historians still argue whether frontier travellers were usually more endangered by the storms themselves or by the decisions made in the uneasy hours after a storm seemed to pass. That phrase, seemed to pass, matters. Freezing rain can pause like a storyteller, letting the room lean in. Then comes the temperature drop, then the wind. Then every soaked mitten stiffens, every blanket gains a shell, and every small mistake starts quietly charging interest. You move closer to what remains of the shelter. The smell is faint but bitter wet charcoal under ice. Your glove brushes a blackened beam and comes away dusty. The ash feels soft, almost warm in memory, though the wood is cold as bone beneath it. Around the ruin, footprints have been blurred by glaze. Someone stood here. Someone paced. Someone perhaps looked down the same road and thought just a little farther. The frontier was full of that phrase. Just a little farther to the post. Just a little farther to the river crossing. Just a little farther until night. It is amazing how often human beings survive by refusing that sentence. You crouch beside a half-buried bundle of straw. It has frozen into a stiff mat, but under the outer crust a few strands remain dry. That matters. Dryness is treasure here. Travellers carried tinder in horn boxes, waxed cloth metal tins, or sometimes tucked close to the body because damp tinder in an ice storm is less a tool than a cruel joke. The shelter may be ruined, but it leaves a lesson. Do not trust what looks wet. Do not trust what looks dry. Test everything. The road ahead descends toward a low hollow where cold air gathers. That hollow will be worse. Ice thickens where damp lies trapped and wind cannot clean it away. Beyond that, perhaps a creek. Beyond the creek, perhaps timber. Beyond timber, perhaps a cabin with a stove, a loft, and someone who will ask no questions until tea is poured. Or perhaps nothing. Frontier lands were often mapped with great confidence, by people who are not currently freezing in them. You stand again slowly, because sudden motion on ice is how the earth wins arguments. Your breath rises in soft white folds. The ash continues to drift from the burned beams whenever a tiny breeze stirs them, settling on the shining ground like grey flour. It feels almost ceremonial, as though the place is marking your arrival and warning you not to become its next quiet story. So you do what survivors have always done before heroism gets involved and ruins everything. You pause, you listen, you take inventory, fingers still moving, feet still dry enough, light fading, shelter gone, road dangerous, weather undecided. A simple list, but in remote frontier lands, simple lists have saved more lives than grand speeches. And as you look toward the glassy trees, toward the hollow, toward the long road that does not care whether you understand it, you begin learning the first rule of ice storms. The storm is not over when the sky clears. It is over only when the world becomes ordinary again. And this world glittering softly around you is not ordinary at all. You linger at the edge of that ruined shelter just long enough to understand something quietly important. The storm may have moved on, but its intentions are still written everywhere around you. You are learning slowly and without enthusiasm that on the frontier survival begins not with movement but with noticing. You tilt your head slightly, listening again. The silence is not empty. It has layers. A faint ticking sound comes from the trees as if the forest itself is counting something down. That is the ice shifting, tightening its grip as temperatures settle lower. Travellers once described it as the woods thinking, which is poetic if a little unsettling when you're standing in the middle of it. You file the sound away. It means the cold is deepening, not easing. Before instruments became common on remote routes, people relied on a kind of practiced attention that feels almost unfamiliar now. You look up at the sky again, not just at the colour, but at the shape of the clouds, the speed of their movement, the way light filters through them. A pale, smeared halo might suggest moisture still hanging high above. A clear, brittle sky might mean the temperature will drop even further by nightfall. Neither option is particularly comforting, but at least one of them is honest. There's a well-known historical truth that many early travellers, especially in North America and Eastern Europe, could predict incoming freezing rain by watching smoke. Not their own necessarily, but any distant plume rising from a cabin or camp. If the smoke climbed straight upward, the air was stable and cold. If it flattened and spread sideways, moisture and shifting pressure were already at work. You imagine that now, scanning the horizon for any sign of human life. Nothing. Not even a faint thread of grey. Either there is no one nearby or they are already conserving fuel, their fires kept low and careful. You crouch again, brushing aside a thin layer of ice crystals from a patch of ground. Beneath it the soil is darker, slightly damp, but not fully frozen. You press your glove into it. It yields, just barely. That tells you something too. The freeze is recent. The storm passed not long ago, and the ground has not yet hardened into full winter certainty. That means the weather could shift again. Ice storms often arrive in waves, each one layering over the last like poorly planned decoration. A breeze stirs gentle at first, then just enough to move the upper branches. You hear a soft cascade as tiny shards of ice fall through the needles and leaves pattering down like fragile rain. It is oddly beautiful. It's also a reminder that nothing above you is entirely stable. Travellers learned quickly to avoid walking directly under heavily coated branches, especially in wind. A falling limb does not need to be large to ruin your evening. You straighten slowly your boots, testing the surface with each shift of weight. Even your own body becomes a kind of instrument. The way your breath feels in your lungs, the sharpness of the air against your skin, the stiffness creeping into your fingers. These are readings just as valid as any dial or gauge, though admittedly less convenient to check. There is a curious little detail from old travel journals that some people swore by watching animals for weather clues, not just in a general sense, but very specifically. If horses refused to move forward on a clear path, it was often because they sensed ice beneath the surface before humans could see it. Dogs, meanwhile, were said to grow restless before freezing rain pacing or whining without clear reason. Whether this was true or just hopeful storytelling is still debated, but you cannot help glancing around as if expecting a silent animal to confirm your suspicions. Nothing appears, which somehow feels like its own answer. Historians continue to debate how much of this observational knowledge was instinct and how much was learned through repeated hardship. Some argue that frontier travellers developed a kind of environmental literacy that modern people have largely lost. Others suggest that what we call skill was often just survival through trial and error, with many mistakes quietly erased from the record because the people who made them did not return to write about it. Either way, you are standing here now benefiting from both perspectives and hoping not to become an example of the latter. You take a careful step forward, then another, watching how your boots interact with the surface. There is a subtle difference between areas where the ice is thin and where it has pooled thicker. Thin ice cracks slightly under pressure, giving a faint reassuring grip. Thick ice remains smooth and indifferent. You aim for the former, though your success rate is not exactly perfect. One foot slips just a little, and your body tenses instinctively. You recover, but the message is clear. Confidence is not your friend here. The road dips ahead just as you noticed earlier, and you pause again at the crest. Cold air settles in low places and with it heavier ice. The hollow looks deceptively calm its surface, reflecting the dim light like a polished mirror. You can almost imagine gliding across it graceful and efficient. That would be a mistake. Travellers learn to approach such areas with suspicion, probing the ground, with sticks or poles when possible, testing each step before committing weight. You do not have a proper pole, but a fallen branch nearby offers itself as a reasonable substitute. You pick it up, its surface slick but manageable, and tap it lightly against the ground ahead. The sound changes depending on what lies beneath. A dull, solid note suggests firm ground. A sharper, hollow tone hints at ice over water or softer soil. You listen carefully, adjusting your path accordingly. It is slow work, but speed has already proven itself unreliable. As you move, you begin to notice other small details. The direction of the wind, faint though it is, seems to be shifting slightly. The clouds above are thinning in places, revealing a pale, washed-out sky behind them. There is no warmth in that light, but there is clarity. If the clouds continue to break, the temperature may drop further as heat escapes into the open sky. That could mean harder ice, but also less immediate precipitation. A trade-off as always. You think briefly about how different this would feel with modern tools. A quick glance at a screen, a simple forecast, a reassuring voice explaining what to expect. Out here, you are left with interpretation and guesswork layered over whatever knowledge you can gather from memory or instinct. It is both empowering and deeply inconvenient. Another sound reaches you, faint but distinct. A low creak followed by a sharper crack somewhere deeper in the trees. You freeze listening. A branch perhaps, or something larger. The forest is adjusting to its new weight, and not all of it will hold. You make a mental note to keep your distance from the densest clusters, favouring open ground where possible. There is a moment as you stand there with your makeshift staff and your careful steps, where the situation feels almost manageable. Not easy certainly, but understandable. The storm has left its marks and you are learning to read them. This is how travellers survived, not through sudden bursts of brilliance, but through steady, patient attention to the world around them. You glance back once more at the burned shelter, now partially obscured by distance, and the slight rise of the land. It is already fading into the landscape, becoming just another quiet story absorbed by the frontier. Ahead the road continues uncertain but still present, and you follow it one measured step at a time, listening, watching, and learning how to read a world that does not explain itself. You move on from the hollow, with your borrowed branch in hand, and the world brightens in that peculiar way ice has of stealing light and giving it back colder. Every shrub glitters. Every fence rail where one still stands wears a clear glass casing. Even the dead weeds along the roadside shine like they have dressed for an occasion no one wanted to attend. And now as the air presses closer, you begin to understand why clothing mattered so deeply to travellers in ice storms. Not fashionable clothing, though people have always tried, bless them. Practical clothing, layered clothing. Clothing that smelled of smoke, animal, grease wool, sweat, and long use. Clothing that did not promise elegance, but quietly argued with death. You look down at yourself and imagine what a traveller might wear in remote frontier lands before waterproof synthetics arrived like smug little miracles. Linen or cotton close to the skin if nothing better was available, though cotton became dangerous when soaked. Wool above that, because wool could still hold warmth even when damp. A heavier coat or cloak over the wool, leather where abrasion mattered, fur where cold had no manners at all, mittens rather than gloves whenever possible, because fingers survive better when they share warmth like nervous villagers in one room. A mainstream historical fact sits snugly in this cold little lesson. Wool was one of the most valued winter fabrics across many frontier regions because its crimped fibres trapped air and retained insulating power even after absorbing moisture. That did not make it magic. A soaked wool coat was still heavy sour smelling and about as glamorous as wearing a sleepy sheep. But compared with many alternatives, it gave travellers a chance. The ice storm adds a special problem. Snow brushes off, rain soaks in. Freezing rain does both, and then hardens, which seems unnecessary, frankly. You run a hand over your sleeve and feel where a thin crust has begun to form. It crackles when you bend your arm. That sound is almost polite, but the danger beneath it is simple. Once clothing stiffens, it stops moving with the body. Once it stops breathing, sweat can gather inside. Then when you pause, that hidden dampness chills you from within. Frontier travellers understood something. Modern hikers are still told often in brighter packaging. You must not overheat in the cold. It sounds absurd until you try walking uphill under heavy layers and begin sweating beneath them. The body feels warm for a while, almost triumphant. Then the road levels out, the wind rises, and your damp shirt becomes a private winter pond. Very refreshing if your goal is misery. So you slow your pace. You loosen what can be loosened. You let a little heat escape before it turns against you. The old travellers did the same, adjusting scarves, opening coats, briefly, changing mittens, turning socks near the fire, and sleeping with small damp garments near the body when drying racks were unavailable. It was not comfortable, but survival rarely checks your comfort preferences first. The boots are another matter. You place each foot carefully aware that footwear is both shield and trap. Moccasins, boots, felt liners, rawhide wrappings, wooden clogs, sealskin footwear in Arctic regions each answered a different landscape. Some indigenous designs used soft soles that allowed travellers to feel the ground and grip better in snow. European leather boots could protect against brush and mud, but when soaked and frozen they became stiff little prisons with ambitions. There is a quirky tidbit from fur trade country that some travellers greased boots and seams with bare-fat tallow fish oil, or whatever oily substance was at hand. This helped shed water, although it could also attract dogs, rodents, or the deep judgment of anyone sharing a small cabin with you. Imagine trying to sleep while your boots smell like an elderly frying pan. Still people did it. History is full of compromises and many of them smell terrible. You pause beneath open sky away from the sagging trees and inspect your hands. Mittens are everything now. A person can walk with discomfort in the legs, with hunger in the belly, with fear sitting quietly behind the ribs. But numb hands are a fast road to helplessness. Without hands you cannot strike a spark, tighten a strap, hold reins, cut food, or open a stubborn tin while muttering unkind things about the manufacturer. Travellers protected hands with wool liners, leather shells, fur mitts, or spare cloth wrapped in layers. Sometimes they carried a second pair inside the coat, so body heat kept them pliable. Historians still argue whether frontier clothing systems owed more to indigenous knowledge, European rural traditions, military supply habits, or improvised blending along the road. The answer, like most real answers, is probably untidy. Travellers borrowed, copied, purchased, traded and adapted. A Scottish wool blanket might be worn over a Métis capote. A Russian peasant coat might meet local fur boots. A settler might scoff at unfamiliar clothing, then quietly adopt it after one bad winter because frostbite has a way of improving cultural humility. You pull your collar higher. The air is sharpened. A thin film of ice gathers on exposed threads and stray hairs. If you had a beard, it would now be collecting small white beads of frozen breath, making you look either rugged or like a poorly stored dessert. Scarves and face cloths helped travellers protect cheeks and noses, but they brought their own difficulties. Breath dampened them. Damp cloth froze. Frozen cloth rubbed skin raw. There is no perfect answer, only a rotating series of mildly disappointing solutions. The road bends through a patch of low brush where ice-coated twigs scratch gently at your coat. The sound is crisp like fingernails on glass. You imagine a traveller wrapped in a blanket coat hood, up-moving through this same kind of thicket. Every branch tugs at the cloth. Every pause allows cold to settle deeper. The body becomes aware of all its edges. Women and men both understood the labour of winter clothing, though written accounts often praised male endurance, while casually ignoring the hands that spun, mended, patched, dried, and remade the garments. A torn seam in summer is annoying. A torn seam in freezing rain is an invitation. Needles, awls, spare cord, and scraps of cloth mattered more than romantic paintings usually admit. No one paints the heroic moment of replacing a mitten tie with numb fingers, though perhaps they should. It would be very moving and slightly itchy. You step over a fallen branch and nearly slip as your boot lands on a hidden glaze. Your staff catches you. The jolt travels through your arms. For a second, your clothing feels too bulky, too slow, like you're wrapped in someone else's bedding. Then balance returns, and you breathe out carefully. Layers protect you, but they also change how you move. Heavy coats reduce reach. Long skirts or loose hems can freeze at the bottom. Wet trouser cuffs stiffen, straps cut into shoulders. A traveller must constantly adjust lift, tuck, tie, loosen and retie. There is wisdom in small motions. You flex your toes inside your boots, you wiggle your fingers, you shrug your shoulders to restore circulation. Old winter guides often advise travellers to check one another's faces for pale patches, because numb skin may not announce itself. Alone you have to become your own kindly but irritating companion. Are your cheeks still feeling? Are your socks still dry enough? Is your scarf freezing into a decorative mistake? The road ahead grows darker where evergreens crowd together, their ice burden creaking above. Before you enter that shadowed passage, you stop once more and take stock. Wool holding, hands moving, feet not yet numb, neck covered, sweat controlled. The checklist is humble, but humbleness is doing fine work today. You remember the ash from the burned shelter, how it settled warm and grey on your shoulders. Fire failed someone there or saved them briefly or both. Clothing is another kind of shelter, one you carry with you fragile and stubborn. It does not defeat the storm, it negotiates. It buys minutes, then hours. And in frontier winter, an hour can be the difference between reaching a cabin lamp and becoming another silence by the road. So you gather your layers around you, not proudly, not dramatically, but with the practical tenderness of someone learning to stay alive. Then you step into the darker trees, hearing the soft crackle of ice on cloth, and continue onward. The trees close around you with a soft crystalline whisper, and your borrowed branch keeps tapping ahead one careful note at a time. The road has narrowed here, if road is still the word we're politely using. It is more like a memory of traffic pressed into earth, frozen, glazed, and then handed back to you with a faintly mocking shine. If you have a horse with you now, and many frontier travellers would have, the animal is no longer just transport. It is a companion, a warning system, a heater with opinions, and occasionally a large nervous philosopher. You watch its ears, you watch its shoulders, you watch the way it places each hoof. A horse does not enjoy falling. This is one of its more relatable traits. The animal lowers its head and sniffs at the crusted ground. Steam drifts from its nostrils in pale clouds. It shifts weight, tests the surface, then hesitates. You may be tempted to urge it forward, because humans are often very attached to plans made under completely different conditions. But the horse knows something your boots have been learning more slowly. Ice does not announce depth. A harmless-looking patch may hide stone, mud water, or nothing helpful at all. A reliable historical detail from frontier travel is that horses, mules, and oxen shaped the pace of winter journeys more than maps did. In many regions, a party could travel only as far as the animals could safely pull graze, be fed, or remain standing. A rider might dream of reaching the next post by evening, but a lame horse converted that dream into a cold roadside problem with remarkable efficiency. You loosen the rein slightly. Not too much. The animal needs guidance, but not blind obedience. Old teamsters often let horses choose footing on difficult ground, especially in snow, mud, or ice. The driver might set the direction, but the hooves negotiated every inch. This partnership was practical, not sentimental, though affection crept in anyway. Spend enough freezing nights beside an animal that carries your food blankets and tired body, and you stop thinking of it as equipment. At least one hopes you do. Otherwise the horse may judge you, and honestly it has grounds. The path bends downhill and the horse stops again. Its ears point forward, then sideways. You follow its gaze. Ahead, a sloping stretch of road gleams brighter than the rest. Water must have run across it during the thawing edge of the storm, then frozen into a smooth sheet. It is the kind of surface that invites tragedy with excellent manners. You step to the side, searching for rougher ground. The brush there is thick, but the frozen stems offer more grip than the road. You lead the horse slowly, keeping its head slightly turned uphill, so it does not rush the descent. Each hoof lands with a soft click, then a sleed, then a catch. You feel every movement through the rain. The animal breathes hard, not from effort alone, but from concentration. You're both concentrating, which is a little comforting. Shared anxiety can be very bonding. There is an odd little detail from some old horse care manuals and travellers' recollections. People sometimes wrapped hooves with sacking rawhide or rope to improve grip on slick surfaces when proper winter shoeing was unavailable. It sounds improvised because it was. Sometimes it helped. Sometimes it came loose at the worst possible moment because history enjoys comic timing in dangerous places. In colder regions, farriers also use special horseshoes with sharp projections called caulks to bite into ice. Useful, yes. Perfect, no. Nothing in this landscape believes in perfect. Writers of frontier history continue to dispute whether animal instinct has been romanticized in survival stories. Some accounts make horses seem almost prophetic, stopping before broken ice, refusing bad crossings, or turning toward shelter. Other scholars remind us that animals also panicked, bolted, misjudged, slipped, and occasionally behaved like enormous toddlers with hooves. Both views can be true. The wise traveller does not worship instinct, but does not ignore it either. You reach the bottom of the slope without falling, which feels like a triumph too small for songs and too large to dismiss. The horse snorts, shaking its head. Ice beads clatter from its mane. You rub its neck, feeling warmth through the damp hair beneath the frozen outer crust. That warmth matters. A chilled animal weakens quickly, and a weakened animal endangers everyone. Care for the horse becomes care for yourself. You check the girth or harness because wet leather stretches and then freezes. A strap that was comfortable an hour ago may now cut chafe or stiffen. Metal bits can become painfully cold. Reins freeze into rigid strips. Blankets gather ice along their edges. The animal's breath can frost around the muzzle. All of this needs attention, and attention takes time. Travellers often carried grain when they could, but feed was heavy. Hay took space. In many frontier regions, animals were expected to graze browse or paw through snow for grass. An ice storm made that difficult. It sealed vegetation under a hard shell. Livestock could smell food beneath it, but not reach it. That is one reason freezing rain could be so dangerous for herds and pack animals. It turned a landscape of possible fodder into a locked pantry. Very elegant. Deeply rude. You lead the horse toward a stand of scrub willow where branches bend low. Some twigs are coated, but others sheltered beneath remain reachable. The animal noses them, bites, chews slowly. It is not a feast, but it is something. You use the pause to flex your fingers and look at the sky through the branches. The clouds have thinned further, revealing a dull, cold brightness. Evening is approaching in layers. The horse's ears flick again. This time the sound is behind you. A cracking branch. Then another. You turn just in time to see a heavy limb fall from a maple, striking the road, with a shuddering crash that sends ice chips skittering across the surface. The horse jerks, muscles tightening. You murmur low, steady nonsense, the traditional language of humans, pretending they are calmer than they are. It works a little. Maybe the words matter. Maybe the tone matters. Maybe the horse simply decides you're not worth dragging into the trees today. You move on, avoiding the fallen limb. The crash reminds you that animals were vulnerable not only to footing but to noise. Ice storms transformed forests into slow-breaking architecture. Wagons rattled differently on glazed ground. Harness bells froze silent. Dogs tucked close to camp. Oxen steadier than horses in some conditions could still lose footing and refuse to rise. Mules famously cautious and famously stubborn sometimes earned their reputation by declining to proceed where humans had become foolishly optimistic. A mounted traveller had to dismount often in such weather. Walking beside the horse reduced the load and made it easier to guide through bad patches. It also kept the human warmer, though too much exertion brought back the sweat problem, that sneaky little villain from the last stretch of road. You remember your layers and adjust again, opening the coat briefly, then closing it before the wind can get ambitious. The animal pauses at a small rise, looking ahead into dimmer country. Somewhere beyond it may be the creek you suspected earlier. Water means risk, but also route. Trails often followed streams and river valleys, because the land opened there. Inns, cabins, trading posts and camps clustered near water. So did fog overflow ice and crossings that looked easier than they were. The horse shifts and you notice its reluctance. Not fear exactly, more like a question. You stand beside it, hand on the rein, and allow the question to remain unanswered for a moment. That too is survival. The frontier rewards those who can wait long enough to learn what they are seeing. The horse breathes beside you, warm and visible. The road glitters ahead. Behind you the burned shelter is gone from sight, the hollow crossed the clothing holding the animal still steady. Together you continue toward the soundless lowland, trusting hoof-hand and hesitation more than pride. You and the horse move toward the lowland with the careful rhythm of two creatures who have both decided that dignity is less important than not falling over. The road curves between dark shrubs and pale grass, then opens into a wider stretch where the wind has begun to move again. It comes lightly at first, slipping across the ice with a thin, searching sound. Not a howl, not yet. More like the storm clearing its throat. The first thought that rises in you is shelter, not comfort, not even warmth exactly. Shelter comes before both. Shelter means something between your body and the falling branches, the sharpening wind, the next wave of freezing rain, the long blue dark that is already gathering at the edges of the world. On remote frontiers, finding shelter before nightfall was often the difference between a difficult story and a final one, and the most sensible travellers treated sunset like a deadline written by someone with no patience. You look around. The land offers possibilities, but none of them are generous. A stand of evergreens to the left, a shallow bank near the creek ahead, a scatter of boulders on higher ground. Farther off, perhaps the outline of a fence or a fallen rail. You narrow your eyes, trying to decide whether it is real or just your tired mind sketching civilization, where it would be convenient. The mind does that. It is very creative when cold. One established fact from frontier history is that travellers often planned routes around known stopping places such as inns, stage stations, mission houses, trading posts, farmsteads, or indigenous camps, because winter travel without regular shelter was dangerously uncertain. Distances that seemed manageable on a dry summer road became entirely different once ice covered the ground and daylight shortened. A 10-mile journey could stretch into an exhausting day. A missed cabin could become a night outdoors, which is a poor subscription service and hard to cancel. You guide the horse toward the rise where the view opens slightly. From there you can see the creek below dark under a thin glassy skin near the edges. Beyond it the land lifts again into timber. No lamp, no smoke, no friendly square of window light. Just trees and that silvery silence. You feel the weight of the decision settle around you. Cross now and search beyond, stay on this side and make what shelter you can push on. 'Cause surely something must be close. That last thought has lured many people into trouble, surely is a dangerous word in bad weather. The wind stirs again, and somewhere overhead ice loosens from a branch. It falls in bright fragments, chiming softly as it strikes the ground. You step away from the trees. That rules out one easy shelter. Dense woods can block wind, but after an ice storm they can also drop limbs for hours, even days. A traveller might prefer the edge of a grove where trunks break the gusts, but branches do not hang directly above the bedroll. The best shelter is rarely perfect. It is simply less foolish than the alternatives. You think of the burned place behind you. It had walls once, perhaps a roof, perhaps a hearth. Someone chose that spot because it was near the road and partly shielded. Now it is a warning in charcoal. Fire inside poor shelter can smoke spark or trap breath. Fire outside can fail. Shelter and fire must cooperate, and cooperation is not always the frontier's favourite hobby. A curious detail from old winter accounts is that travellers sometimes burrowed into haystacks, snowbanks, or even piles of dry leaves where no building could be reached. In some farming districts a haystack could save a life, though it might also contain mice damp spots and the unmistakable perfume of livestock. Very soothing in a rustic way. Snow shelters, when built correctly, could insulate surprisingly well, but freezing rain complicated them. It made crusts, sealed entrances, and turned soft surfaces into hard shells that trapped moisture in inconvenient places. You scan the ground again and notice a low overhang where the creek bank has been undercut. It is not a cave, not really, but it forms a shallow hollow below roots and frozen earth. Too close to water for comfort. Too exposed if the creek rises or the bank collapses. You leave it alone. A desperate traveller might use it, but desperation is not yet in charge, and you would like to keep it unemployed. A better possibility lies near the boulders on higher ground. 3 large stones form a rough angle, and behind them the wind seems weaker. There are no heavy branches overhead. A patch of brush nearby may provide material for a lean screen. The ground slopes slightly, which helps cold air drain away, though too much slope would make sleeping miserable. You walk toward it, testing each step, leading the horse around the slickest patches. Researchers disagree over how often travellers truly built elaborate emergency shelters, compared with simply enduring miserable nights in partial cover. Written survival tales sometimes make shelter building sound neat and decisive, because stories enjoy tidy solutions. Diaries and military reports, however, often describe damp blankets, half-finished windbreaks, cramped wagons, and people sitting awake until dawn. The truth may be that many shelters were not clever structures at all, but hurried negotiations with available misery. You reach the boulders and stand in their lee. The change is immediate. The wind softens against your face. The air is still cold, of course. It does not suddenly become a parlour. But the difference between wind and no wind is the difference between losing heat quickly and losing it more slowly, which in frontier terms is practically luxury. You tie the horse where it can stand safely away from ice-loaded branches, with enough slack to lower its head, but not enough to tangle. If you have a blanket for it, you shake off the crusted ice and settle it more securely across its back. The animal shifts, then settles, breath rising in steady clouds. You murmur again, mostly for yourself. Now you begin the little work of making a place. You gather branches from the ground, avoiding those glazed too thickly with ice. Some are stiff and useless. Others sheltered beneath brush still have a bit of spring. You lean them between the stones, forming a low screen against the wind. It is not pretty. No one will build a heritage museum around this, but it interrupts the moving air, and that matters. The sound of your work is small and intimate. Ice crackles underfoot. Twigs scrape stone. Your breath comes slower now, careful not to sweat. You clear a space on the ground, pushing aside crust and frozen weeds until you reach a less slippery surface. If you had spruce boughs, you would lay them thick beneath you to separate your body from the cold earth. Here you settle for brush grass and whatever dryish material can be found under the outer glaze. Dryish is not a word of triumph, but tonight it is welcome. You remember the earlier lesson: do not trust surfaces. You break open clumps of grass and find that under the ice some stems remain usable. You place them beneath your intended sitting place. A traveller who lies directly on frozen ground gives warmth away with heartbreaking generosity. Better to sit, crouch, curl and insulate. The ground is patient. It will take everything you offer. As the light fades, your shelter becomes less a structure than a decision made visible. You have chosen not to gamble on the next unknown mile. You have chosen stones over trees, higher ground, over the creek bank, windbreak over wandering. It is not heroic. It is better than heroic. It is sensible. The sky darkens to pewter. The ice on the grass holds the last light in thin silver lines. Somewhere across the creek a branch cracks and falls unseen. The horse breathes. Your hands still move. Your layers still hold. The road continues beyond the dusk, but for now you do not follow it. You settle behind the stones close enough to the horse to hear its steady shifting and begin thinking about fire. Behind the stones in the fading light, fire becomes less an idea than a question. You ask with your whole body, can anything here still burn? Can flame be persuaded to live in a world glazed with ice? Can warmth be made before your fingers lose their usefulness, and your patience turns into poetry, which is rarely helpful in emergencies? You begin by searching low and close because the obvious branches are hopeless. The ones in plain sight shine under their glassy skins. They would hiss smoke and sulk if touched by flame. You need hidden dryness, the small protected scraps that storms miss. Under the boulders beneath, curled bark inside dead stems under leaning brush. The frontier traveller survives by becoming very interested in things most people would step over. You kneel, carefully keeping your coat from dragging on the crusted ground. With the point of your branch, you lift a mat of frozen grass near the stone. Beneath the outer shell, the lower fibres are pale and brittle. Not dry exactly, but closer to dry than the rest of this shining disappointment. You pull some free and tuck it inside your coat for a while, letting body heat help. It scratches through your inner layers. History is not always elegant. A solid historical detail from winter travel is that many travellers carried tinder in protected containers such as metal boxes, leather pouches, horns, or waxed cloth packets. Char, cloth, tow, punk wood, birch bark, dry moss, scraped linen, and later matches all served the same quiet purpose. Keep one tiny beginning alive against a large indifferent world. Without tinder, a hatchet and a forest could still leave you cold. You check what you have. Perhaps a small tin with charred cloth. Perhaps a twist of dry bark saved earlier from the ruined shelter. Perhaps only lint grass and hope, which is a poor fuel but a traditional one. You cup your hand around the tinder, shielding it from the wind that curls around the stones. The windbreak helps, but flame is dramatic. It dislikes criticism. The smell of damp earth rises as you scrape a shallow space clear of ice. Fire must not sit directly on wet ground if you can avoid it. You lay a base of small sticks, bark flakes, and bits of split wood from branches that were dead before the storm. Dead standing wood is often drier than fallen wood, though. After freezing rain, even that rule grows slippery. You find a thin, dead limb under a leaning shrub and break it open. The outer surface is glazed, but the inside snaps, pale and fibrous. There, a little promise. There is an odd little frontier habit recorded in several cold weather traditions. Some travellers shaved curls from the inside of their own walking sticks or sled parts, where no dry kindling could be found. This was not ideal naturally. Burning pieces of your equipment is generally a sign that the evening has not gone according to plan. But a small shaving could start a flame, and a flame could preserve the rest. Sensible desperation has its own arithmetic. You take your knife, if you have one, and begin making fine curls from the dry interior of the branch. Thin curls catch faster than thick sticks. They gather in your palm like pale feathers. Your fingers are slower now, but still obedient. You flex them before continuing. You remember with mild resentment that numb hands do not negotiate well with sparks. The method depends on your era and kit. Flint and steel require patience. A sulphur match requires dryness and luck. A lucifer match, once common in the 19th century, strikes more readily, but may be fragile, damp, or unpleasantly scented. In some regions, slow matches or embers were carried from camp to camp in covered containers. In others, coals were banked under ash overnight. Fire was not always created anew. It was guarded, shared, inherited across mornings. That is a comforting thought, really. Warmth is a thing passed from hand to hand. Specialists still dispute whether the spread of friction matches change frontier survival as dramatically as popular storytelling suggests. Some emphasize the convenience of easier ignition. Others point out that matches still failed when wet were not always affordable and did nothing to solve the harder problem of finding usable fuel in bad weather. A match can make a spark. It cannot make damp wood stop being damp. If only it could. Many cold travellers would have written thank you letters. You strike. The first spark dies immediately as if offended by the assignment. You breathe slowly, not sighing too hard over the tinder. Too much breath scatters heat. Too little, and the ember starves. You try again. A tiny orange point appears in the char cloth, no larger than a watchful eye. You fold the dry grass and shavings around it, then lift the bundle carefully. Smoke threads upward, sharp and earthy. The smell changes from cold dampness to something warmer, more human. You blow gently. The ember brightens, the grass darkens, curls, and suddenly a little flame rises, thin and trembling. It is not yet a fire. It is a suggestion of fire, and suggestions must be encouraged. You feed it the finest shavings first, then slivers, then twigs no thicker than a knitting needle. Each piece must catch before the next arrives. Feed too much too soon and you smother it. Fire, like certain guests, needs attention, but not crowding. The little flame grows, it licks along the bark curls, finds resin in a twig and makes a brighter pop. You shelter it with your body while keeping your coat back, because wearing a wool cloak beside sparks is one of those historical experiences best enjoyed indirectly. Smoke drifts into your face, your eyes water, you shift. The smoke follows you because smoke has a gift for choosing the person most emotionally vulnerable. The horse lifts its head and watches. Perhaps it understands. Perhaps it merely hopes the strange orange thing will not become another problem. You add slightly larger sticks, angling them so air can move between them. Flame needs space. That is easy to forget when fear urges you to pile everything on at once. A small fire well fed is better than a large heap of wet branches performing a dramatic fog machine impression. Warmth begins at your hands, not much but enough to change the mood of the world. The ice on nearby twigs glints orange. The stones catch a faint glow. Your shelter, crude and crooked, becomes a room because fire has declared it so. You hold your palms near the heat, then pull them back before the skin warms too quickly. Cold flesh must be coaxed, not shocked. The same is true of frightened travellers, though no manual says it quite that way. You use the fire for more than comfort. You dry tinder for later, placing it carefully near warmth but not flame. You soften frozen straps. You warm a little water if you can chip ice clean enough to melt. You hold damp mittens near the heat, turning them slowly, resisting the temptation to roast them like unfortunate pastries. Too much heat can shrink leather scorch wool and turn useful gear into sad little relics. The fire also changes your sense of time. Darkness gathers fully beyond the stones, but the small circle of light gives you a centre. Outside it branches crack ice ticks, wind moves over the creek. Inside it smoke rises, sparks drift, and your breath slows. You're still in danger, yes. Let us not become smug. But you're no longer only enduring the storm's leftovers. You're answering them. You think back to the burned shelter, and the thought makes you careful. Fire must be watched. Fire must be contained. You clear more ice and debris around the base. You keep fuel stacked to one side, not leaning over the flame. You make sure the horse cannot step into it if startled. Survival is often just warmth surrounded by rules. The flame settles into coals, not large but steady. You feed it one small stick at a time and listen to the quiet crackle. In this wet and frozen world, that sound feels almost like speech. It says stay. It says wait. It says morning is possible, though not promised. So you sit behind the stones, your face warmed, your back cold, your hands slowly returning to themselves. Above you, the ice-covered night deepens. Before you, the fire breathes fragile and stubborn, exactly like every traveller who ever coaxed light from damp wood and refused to let the dark have the final word. The fire steadies itself into a low bed of coals, and with that small victory another need rises from the background of your body. Hunger. It arrives politely at first, then more firmly, like a person tapping at a door who knows perfectly well you're inside. You've been walking, balancing, watching gathering, cutting, coaxing flame, and pretending not to be worried. All of that burns energy. Cold burns more. Fear, though less visible, also takes its share. Frontier travellers understood this in practice even when they did not speak in modern terms about calories and metabolism. A body in winter is a stove with opinions. It needs fuel, and if you do not feed it, it begins burning its own furniture. You reach into your pack or coat pouch and take inventory by firelight. The food is plain dense and not especially charming. Hard bread, a small pouch of tea, perhaps dried meat, perhaps a lump of pemmican wrapped in cloth, maybe a little cheese gone firm with cold or parched grain, or a few beans that would be more useful if time and water were feeling generous. The frontier rarely offered bedtime snacks with attractive packaging. It offered things that endured. A dependable fact from the history of long-distance travel is that pemmican became one of the most important portable foods in northern North America, especially in the fur trade, because it combined dried meat, rendered fat, and sometimes berries into a compact, durable, high-energy ration. It was not invented for tourists seeking rustic authenticity. It was food made for distance, cold labour and storage. It kept people moving when fresh supplies were uncertain. You unwrap a piece and hold it near the fire, not too close. It softens slowly, the fat loosening with warmth. The smell is rich and heavy, a little smoky, a little animal, not unpleasant if you are hungry enough, and you're becoming very historically open-minded. You cut or break off a portion and chew carefully. It is dense, almost stubborn. It asks your jaw to participate in survival. Very democratic. Food in freezing weather brings its own complications. Anything with moisture can freeze hard enough to threaten teeth. Bread becomes a tool. Cheese becomes geology. Dried meat can resist biting like it has signed a legal agreement. Travellers often tucked food inside clothing to soften it before eating, which is sensible, though it does mean dinner may spend time near your ribs before reaching your mouth. Modern dining has lost some intimacy, perhaps for the best. You set a small cup or tin near the coals and begin melting clean ice or snow for water. The old warning matters here. Snow looks plentiful, but eating it directly chills the body and gives little immediate water. It must be melted when possible. Ice from branches may carry dirt, bark, soot, or whatever else the storm collected on its way down, but you choose the cleanest pieces you can find. Frontier tea was often less about refinement than warmth, hydration, and something to hold in both hands while reconsidering your life choices. There is a peculiar note from travel accounts that some people carried tea bricks, compressed leaves, or portable soup cakes so hard they needed scraping or hammering. Portable soup, an 18th and 19th century preparation of concentrated broth, could be dissolved into hot water, assuming it had not turned into a heroic relic at the bottom of a bag. Sailors, soldiers, and travellers used such concentrated foods because they saved space. They also reminded everyone that convenience food has always existed. It just used to look more like furniture polish. You add tea when the water warms enough and the scent rises gently through the smoke. Bitter, earthy, comforting. Not the refined tea of porcelain cups and calm drawing rooms, but frontier tea brewed in a blackened vessel, flavoured by smoke, metal and gratitude. You sip carefully. Heat moves down your throat and spreads through your chest. It does not solve everything. It does not repair roads or thaw boots or summon a friendly inn. But for a few seconds the world becomes smaller and kinder. Food was more than nourishment. It was morale. A handful of dried fruit, a spoonful of molasses, a pinch of salt, a shared biscuit. These could change the feeling of a night. People trapped by winter weather often wrote about meals with surprising tenderness. Not because the meals were grand, but because they gave shape to waiting. Eat now. Drink now. Feed the animals if possible. Save the rest. Do not let fear consume all order. Historians have long disagreed about how often frontier travellers truly face starvation during winter journeys, compared with the more common danger of exhaustion, made worse by poor rations. Newspapers loved dramatic stories of famine on the road, and sometimes those stories were real. But many travellers suffered in less theatrical ways, growing weaker through undereating, bad planning, spoiled supplies, or food that existed in the pack but could not be prepared under the conditions. A sack of flour is less inspiring when everything is wet, dark, frozen, and your cooking pot has wandered off with someone else. You break hard bread into smaller pieces and dip it into hot tea to soften it. The texture changes from stone to something like stubborn paste. Wonderful! Luxury has many definitions. Tonight, edible counts. Crumbs fall onto your blanket or coat and you pick them up carefully. Waste feels different when supplies are limited. Every fragment matters. Even the horse watches with interest, though you do not share the tea despite its thoughtful expression. The animal needs food too, and that may worry you more than your own hunger. Grain, if carried, must be rationed. A horse working in cold weather needs more feed, not less. Yet feed is heavy, and frontier routes often depended on finding hay, grass, bark, or stored fodder at stopping places. After an ice storm, as you already saw, the world can become a locked cupboard. You offer what you can, perhaps a measure of oats from a small sack, perhaps access to brush, perhaps simply rest. It chews with slow patience. You admire this. You also envy it slightly. Horses can eat willow twigs without questioning the menu. Salt matters, fat matters, warm liquid matters. People travelling in cold conditions often craved fatty foods because fat stores energy densely and helps the body endure long exposure. In many northern cultures, fat was not an indulgence but a necessity. The modern impulse to politely trim it away would have looked in this setting like an eccentric attempt to become cold faster. You take another small bite of pemmican and accept its richness as practical wisdom. As the night deepens, you organise the remaining food, not by abundance, because abundance is not present, but by purpose. A portion for morning when cold makes movement slow, a portion for emergency not to be touched unless the road turns worse. A bit of tinder kept away from food grease, because greasy crumbs and fire-making supplies should not become one tragic little package. Tea wrapped dry again, knife cleaned as best you can. Scraps secured so animals do not know through your camp after dark. The firelight flickers over your hands. They look rougher now, reddened by cold and work. You hold the cup again, breathing in steam. The smell mingles with wet wool smoke horse and thawing leather. It is not a pleasant room exactly, but it is a room made from effort. The stones are your walls. The fire is your hearth. The food, plain as it is, becomes proof that you still belong to tomorrow. You think of travellers in other frontier lands carrying dried fish across frozen rivers, millet cakes across steppe roads, barley meal through mountain passes, seal oil, along Arctic coasts, dates, and hard biscuits through cold desert nights. The ingredients changed, but the lesson remained. Food that survives the journey helps the traveller survive the journey. It is simple. It is profound. It is also, depending on the biscuit, very difficult to chew. Your hunger eases not fully, but enough. Enough is a powerful word out here. Enough warmth, enough food, enough light, enough sense not to keep walking into darkness. You wrap the remaining ration and place it close where it will not freeze into complete hostility before dawn. Beyond the shelter of stones, the creek waits under its uncertain glass. Tomorrow, perhaps you will cross it. Tonight you sip the last of the tea, listen to the horse breathe and let the coals glow lower, carrying warmth inward, one careful mouthful at a time. By morning the fire has become a quiet red memory under ash, and the world beyond the stones looks even more polished than it did before sleep took you in small uneasy pieces. The cold has hardened everything. Your blanket crackles when you move. Your boots resist at first, then bend with a complaining stiffness. The horse lifts its head and exhales a cloud that drifts sideways in the grey light. You eat a little drink what warmth you can make and look toward the creek. It waits below the rise, dark in the centre, pale at the edges, rimmed with ice, that looks smooth enough to trust and thin enough to regret. Water is one of the old frontier's great contradictions. It guides, roads, feeds, camps, turns mills, marks boundaries, and gives travellers a place to refill their vessels. Then in winter, it disguises itself as a flaw and asks whether you're feeling lucky. You are not. You descend slowly toward the bank, keeping the horse behind you until the crossing has been judged. The ground near water is worse than the road. Hooves, boots, wagon, wheels, thaw, overflow and refreeze have made a layered mess beneath the glaze. Your staff taps ahead. Some places answer solidly. Others give a hollow sound that makes your stomach tighten. A dependable piece of travel history is that rivers and creeks shaped frontier routes across much of the world because they offered natural corridors through forests, plains, mountains, and marshes. Yet crossings were also among the most dangerous points on a journey. Bridges were rare in remote districts, ferries might not run in winter, and a ford that was safe in autumn could become lethal under ice. Travellers remembered crossings the way sailors remembered reefs. You step closer to the edge and crouch. The creek is not wide, perhaps only a few body lengths across at the narrowest place, but width is not the only question. Ice near the bank can be thick while the current thins it in the middle. Snow or freezing rain can hide weak spots. Overflow can create layers with water trapped between them. A surface may carry a fox and betray a horse. That distinction matters very much to both you and the horse. The sound of the creek is muffled but present. A low-moving murmur beneath the ice. It is not fully frozen. You can hear water slipping along patient and dark. You look for signs. Bubbles beneath clear ice. Dark streaks where current runs faster. White cloudy ice where trapped air may weaken the sheet. Places where reeds pierce the surface, sometimes anchoring thicker edges, sometimes hiding gaps. Nothing is simple. Nature apparently missed the meeting about user-friendly design. There is an unusual detail found in some northern travel practices. People sometimes tested ice with an axe spear pole, or even by watching how cracks spread from a careful blow. Clear blue ice was often considered stronger than milky honeycombed or snow-filled ice, though local knowledge mattered more than neat rules. In parts of Eurasia and North America, travellers also listened to ice believing certain booming sounds meant it was adjusting rather than failing. Comforting perhaps, unless you were standing on it at the time. You do not step onto the ice yet. You walk along the bank searching for a better crossing. The narrowest point is not always the safest. A wider, shallow ford with stones beneath may be better than a narrow channel with swift water. A bend may collect debris-thickening ice, or it may conceal undercut banks. Fallen trees can form bridges, but after an ice storm they are slick unstable, and inclined to behave like traps wearing bark. Farther upstream you find a place where the creek spreads over gravel. The water seems shallower. Ice is formed in plates along the edges with an open ribbon of water in the middle. That may be safer than trusting a continuous sheet. Wet feet are dangerous, yes. but a controlled wetting may be survivable if you can dry afterward. Falling through hidden ice with pack coat and horse involved is a much larger problem, and history gives it a very poor review. Researchers differ on whether winter travellers preferred ice bridges or open fords when both were available. Some accounts praise frozen rivers as roads, especially where thick ice supported sledges and teams for months. Others warn again and again that early season ice thaw ice and river ice, after freezing rain, could deceive even experienced people. The disagreement often comes down to timing local climate, and whether the person telling the story crossed safely or learned humility very quickly. You return to the horse and prepare carefully. Packs must be secured. Anything that cannot get wet should be wrapped higher. Reins must be held so the animal can balance its head. If the footing fails, pulling too hard may make things worse. You speak softly, because calm is contagious when it works and at least gives you something to do when it does not. You lead the horse to the shallow place. Your staff probes first. The near ice cracks under your weight and cold water slips over your boot sole. Not deep. You step deliberately onto gravel beneath. The shock of cold travels upward anyway. Your breath catches. The horse hesitates, then follows one hoof, breaking through the thin edge with a brittle snap. It snorts, jerks slightly, but does not bolt. Good. Very good. You praise it in the low voice of someone who knows praise is cheaper than oats. The middle ribbon is open. Water curls around your boots, tugging at the leather. You move slowly, facing slightly upstream for balance. The horse places its hooves with care, each movement sending ripples beneath loose ice plates. They knock together with delicate clinks like broken cups. It would be beautiful if your feet were not actively becoming a weather concern. You reach the far edge where ice shelves upward against the bank. This is often the awkward part. Getting out can be harder than getting in. The bank is slick. The horse's front hooves slide once, scraping loudly. You shift sideways, choosing a patch where frozen grass protrudes through the glaze. Your staff bites into it. The horse lunges, gently catches and climbs. For a moment, everything is motion, breath splashing, scraping, and the soft thud of hooves on frozen earth. Then you are across. You stand there, water dripping from your boots, heart beating with more enthusiasm than elegance. The creek continues behind you, as if nothing important has happened. This is rude, but typical of creeks. Now comes the second survival task, the one less dramatic than crossing, and therefore easier to neglect. You must deal with wetness immediately. You move to a sheltered patch above the bank, stamp your boots to shed water, and check whether it has entered past the tops. If socks are wet, they need changing or drying. If you have spare foot wraps, this is their moment. Travellers often carried extra socks or strips of wool close to the body, and this was not a decorative habit. Dry feet are not a luxury. They are transportation. You loosen the horse's girth or harness and check its legs, especially if ice is cut or packed around the hooves. Water freezes quickly in hair straps and fetlocks. A small lump of ice can rub raw over distance. You break away what you can with gloved fingers. The horse tolerates this with saintly impatience. The far bank rises into timber, but you avoid standing beneath the heaviest branches. You find a patch of open ground where wind can help pull moisture away without stealing too much warmth. If there is sun, even weak sun, you turn toward it. If not, movement must do. You walk a little enough to restore heat, not enough to sweat. Always the balancing act. Too cold, too warm, too wet, too tired. Frontier travel is basically an argument with several invisible accountants. Behind you, the creek marks a boundary. Not just on the land, but in the day. You have crossed from last night's refuge into the next uncertain stretch. The road ahead looks faint, but real climbing between ice-bright trees toward higher ground. Somewhere beyond it, perhaps there is smoke, or a trading post, or another hollow, or nothing until dusk. You adjust your layers, pat the remaining food, check the tinder, and tighten your grip on the staff. The horse flicks its ears forward, listening to the uphill trail. You listen too. No voices, no bells, only the creak behind you, the crack of distant branches and the soft crunch of your first steps away from the water. The frozen crossing is done, but the wet memory of it travels with you inside your boots, beneath the straps in every careful movement. And so you climb slower, now wiser by one creak, carrying the lesson that ice is not ground, simply because it lets you stand on it for a while. The trail climbs away from the creek and begins to lose its confidence. At first it is still visible as a pale groove between the trees, two ruts softened by frost and sealed in places by the last freezing rain. Then the land rises, bends, and the ruts fade under a shine of ice-fallen twigs and wind-scattered needles. The road does not end exactly. It simply becomes less willing to admit where it is going. You stop and look ahead. This is where maps become suggestions. Not useless, no. A map can be a precious thing, a folded promise, a little rectangle of human optimism. But in remote frontier lands, especially after ice, a map often tells you where someone thought a road should be, where a river was last seen behaving itself, where a cabin stood before weather fire. Abandonment or ordinary disappointment had other ideas. Your map may show a line. The forest shows you 10 possible lines and 9 of them are lying. You take out whatever guide you have. A paper map perhaps wrapped in oilcloth. A sketch copied from another traveller. A trader's directions remembered from a smoky room. Turn at the split oak. Follow the ridge until the old clearing. Keep the creek on your left. Very practical unless the split oak has fallen, the clearing has grown shut, and the creek has wandered behind a screen of iced brush like a shy accomplice. One steady historical fact is that many frontier routes were marked not by formal road signs, but by blazed trees' cairns, notched posts, river bends, ridge lines, and local memory. Travellers depended heavily on landmarks, and landmarks could vanish under snow-fog darkness, fire flood, or the quiet violence of an ice storm. A broken branch could erase the only visible mark for miles. A fallen tree could make the correct path look blocked and the wrong path look inviting. You move forward slowly, searching the trunks. There, on a pine to your right, a scar in the bark, old and pale beneath its icy skin. A blaze. Maybe. You brush it with your glove. The mark is too regular to be natural, a rectangular wound long healed around the edges. Someone cut it years ago to guide others through this stretch. It points the way, not loudly, but enough. You feel a small warmth of gratitude toward the unknown hand that raised an axe here before you were ever imagined. The horse waits behind you, head lowered, steam drifting from its nostrils. It does not care about cartography. It cares about footing scent and whether the path ahead contains unpleasant surprises. In this, the horse may be wiser than the map. You follow the blazed trees where you can find them. Some are hidden beneath ice. Some face away, marked for travellers coming in the opposite direction. Some have grown faint, swallowed by bark over time. Navigation becomes a conversation with fragments. A scar. A bend. A ridge. A patch of open sky through the canopy. You keep the creek somewhere below and behind your left shoulder, because losing all relationship to water would be unwise. Water can be danger, yes, as your boots remember, but it also anchors direction. A strange little detail from older trail practice is that travellers sometimes bent young saplings, tied branches, stacked stones, or cut secret marks understood only by a particular group. Hunters, trappers, smugglers, surveyors, and indigenous guides all had marking systems, some public, some private. To the untrained eye, one bent branch might look like weather damage. To someone who knew the pattern, it might say camp nearby, pour water ahead, or turn here unless you enjoy walking in circles, which generally you do not. You reach a place where the path divides around a low hill. The left way slopes into darker timber. The right way keeps higher ground, but looks less travelled. Under normal conditions, the deeper rut might decide it. Today the deeper rut is filled with smooth ice and fallen limbs. The higher track has more exposed roots and patches of rough frost. It may be harder, but it may also be safer. You think of all the decisions already made. Do not trust the hollow. Do not sleep under heavy branches. Do not hurry across ice. Do not believe the shortest route is the kindest. These lessons gather behind your eyes like quiet advisors, each smelling faintly of smoke, wet wool and horse. Some experts still question how accurately travellers later remembered their winter routes. Diaries written at day's end may compress confusion into certainty. Memoirs written years later often straighten crooked paths and give every choice a cleaner reason than it had in the moment. Oral traditions can preserve astonishingly precise landscape knowledge, but they can also shift with retelling. The past, like this road, sometimes looks clearer after someone has walked away from it. You choose the higher ground. The climb is slow. Ice is formed in thin plates over exposed roots, and your staff becomes essential again. The horse picks its way behind you. Twice you stop to examine marks on trees. One is a blaze. One is only bark split by frost. Another is a woodpecker wound, which is less helpful unless the woodpecker has developed a postal system. You smile despite the cold. A small smile, but still. Humour is another ration, and it weighs nothing. The light shifts as clouds break apart. For a moment the sun appears low and pale, turning the forest into a hall of glass. The ice on every branch burns silver. Your shadow stretches long across the ridge. This gives you direction if you know the time of day and you do more or less. The sun is no perfect guide in broken weather, but it is another clue. Travellers use sun stars, prevailing winds, Moss River flow slope and memory. None alone was enough. Together they formed a net. At night stars could help, but ice storms often left clouds fog or ground glare that confused distance. The North Star guided many travellers in the Northern Hemisphere, while southern travellers learned their own celestial patterns. Yet even star knowledge depended on seeing the sky. A covered sky turns confidence inward. Then you must rely on terrain habit and the fragile record of those who came before. You find another blaze near the top of the rise. This one is fresh enough to show pale wood beneath the ice. Someone passed here recently, perhaps this season. That thought changes the air. Recent human presence means the route may still lead somewhere active. A cabin, a post, a logging camp. Or less romantically, someone else also lost and making marks with great determination. Still, it is something. You pause to listen. The forest has opened slightly. The wind moves more freely here, and with it comes a faint sound that does not belong to branches. A dull tap, perhaps, or the knock of loose wood. You hold your breath. There it is again, not close, not certain, but regular enough to make you wonder. A shutter moving in wind, a loose sign, a bucket against a wall. Your mind begins building shelter around the sound before your eyes confirm it. Dangerous, but understandable. You continue along the ridge, keeping the fresh blaze line ahead. The road is still uncertain, but now it has signs of use. Broken ice where hooves may have passed before the last freeze. A bit of dark thread snagged on brush. A cut stump with chips frozen around its base. Each clue adds weight to your choice. And slowly the map in your hand becomes less important than the map forming inside your attention. Creek behind, ridge beneath, wind from the right, blazes ahead, higher ground safer than hollow, possible sound beyond the trees. You fold the paper away before damp can reach it. The frontier does not give you certainty. It gives you enough clues to move carefully into uncertainty. So you follow them step by step while the ice-bright forest watches, and somewhere ahead, faint as a thought before sleep, something taps in the cold. The tapping comes and goes as you follow the ridge, sometimes clear enough to pull you forward, sometimes lost beneath the creak of iced branches and the careful sound of hooves behind you. You do not hurry. Hope is useful, but it has poor footing. The trees thin gradually and a shape appears between them. At first it looks like another boulder dark against the pale ground. Then you see a straight edge. Then another. A roofline low and heavy with ice. A wall of logs. A door with something hanging loose beside it, tapping whenever the wind moves. A signboard. You stop before stepping into the clearing. Remote places teach caution. A building can mean Warmth Food News Company. It can also mean quarrels, illness suspicion, or simply an empty room where the mice have already made their own arrangements. Still, the sight of human work changes the whole landscape. The road is no longer only road, it is connection. Smoke rises from a chimney, thin but real. It climbs a short way, bends sideways, and dissolves into the cold air. Someone is inside. You lead the horse slowly into the open, making enough sound to announce yourself without startling anyone. This is one of those small courtesies that may also keep you alive. Frontier hospitality was often generous, but it did not always enjoy surprises at dusk. A dog barks once from somewhere near the wall, then again more confidently as if remembering its professional responsibilities. The door opens inward. A face appears in the dimness framed by wool shadow and suspicion. Not hostility, not welcome either. The frontier often begins with assessment. Who are you? What do you carry? Are you alone? Are you trouble? Are you bringing news, disease, debt, or just wet boots? You raise a hand and speak calmly. A traveller from the lower road. Storm caught you, creek crossed, horse tired, needs shelter if there is room. There is a pause. The person looks past you at the horse, then at the sky, then at your boots, which are doing an excellent impression of evidence. Finally, the door opens wider. Inside, warmth does not rush out. It seeps. A low fire burns on a hearth or in an iron stove. The air smells of smoke-damp wool onions, leather, and bodies that have been confined together by weather. It is not a perfumed atmosphere, no, but after the road it feels almost luxurious. You step in and feel every frozen seam of your clothing begin to remember movement. A well-known truth of frontier travel is that survival often depended on networks of strangers, innkeepers, ferrymen, indigenous guides, traders, missionaries, soldiers, farmers, hunters, and postal riders. The romantic image of the lone traveller has always been a little overconfident. People crossed remote lands by leaning on other people's shelters, trails, warnings, languages, food stores, and local knowledge. Even solitude had infrastructure. The room is small, a table of rough planks, a bench, pegs crowded with coats, a kettle near the fire, a loft above perhaps. Two other travellers sit along the wall, their faces turned toward you with that quiet curiosity of people who have been watching the same fire too long and welcome fresh material. One has a bandaged hand, another holds a cup between both palms, guarding the warmth as if it might flee. The person who opened the door gestures toward a place near the wall where you can shed outer ice. You do so carefully because thawing clothing drips everywhere, and no one loves a guest who turns the floor into a pond. Your coat crackles as it loosens. Your mittens steam faintly. Your scarf, once a protection, has become a stiff and loyal nuisance. Someone asks about the road behind you. You tell them of the burned shelter, the hollow, the creek, the falling limbs. Heads nod. No one seems surprised. One older traveller clicks their tongue softly at the mention of the creek crossing, and says the upstream ford has been poor since the last thaw. This would have been useful yesterday, but information often has theatrical timing. A curious detail from many frontier societies is that travellers exchange route knowledge almost like currency. A warning about a washed bridge, a hostile dog, a safe spring, a sick household, a reliable blacksmith or an honest innkeeper could be worth as much as coin. Some people kept mental maps of hospitality, which cabins welcomed strangers, which demanded payment, which had hay, which watered spirits more freely than horses. Very practical. Also an early version of customer reviews, though with more frostbite. The horse is led or shown to a shed, lean stable, or fenced side of the building where it can stand out of the wind. You help rub ice from its legs and loosen the tack. If there is hay, even poor hay, it feels like kindness. If grain is offered, it feels like wealth. Animals were part of every negotiation. A traveller might be given a place by the fire, but the horse needed protection too. because without it you are not a traveller anymore. You are a person with luggage and regret. Back inside, a cup is handed to you. Tea broth or hot water darkened with something approximate. You accept it with both hands. The heat presses into your palms. You taste smoke salt and perhaps a hint of onion. It is wonderful. Not because it is objectively wonderful, although let us be generous, but because your body understands it as rescue. There is talk in the room, low and uneven. The storm, a wagon stuck 2 miles east, a family waiting for news, a trader delayed with a sledge, a line of trees down across the North Road, a rumour of a guide who knows a better crossing through the marsh, though someone else snorts at this and says that guide knows better ways to charge people, not necessarily better ways to travel. Interpretations vary among historians about how equal these exchanges of help really were. Some emphasize mutual dependence and the ethics of hospitality in harsh landscapes. Others point to unequal power debt, colonial pressure, exploitation of indigenous knowledge, and the fact that help was often shaped by race, gender, class, language, and authority. Both things can live in the same room. Warmth may be shared, and still the world outside that warmth may be deeply unfair. You notice that the person with the surest knowledge of the local trails is not the loudest. They sit near the hearth mending a strap with slow, practiced hands. Their clothing blends materials and habits from several worlds, wool cloth hide beadwork or patched canvas, a knife worn where it can be reached easily. When they speak, the others quiet slightly. They describe the ridge ahead, the fallen timber, the safer hollow, the place where ice forms over black mud and fool's wagon wheels. They do not dramatize it. They simply know. This knowledge has roots deeper than the road itself. Indigenous guides, Métis traders, local hunters, Siberian pathfinders, Andean muleteers, Balkan shepherds, and countless unnamed residents of cold frontiers carried environmental memory that outsiders depended on, sometimes respectfully, sometimes greedily, often without proper credit. Routes across difficult country were not discovered by every newcomer anew. They were taught, borrowed, negotiated, and too often taken. You listen closely. The guide says not to follow the lower track after dawn. It looks easier, but the ice lies over seep water, and 2 horses have already gone down there this week. Take the ridge until the split cedar, then descend where the stones show through. If the wind rises, wait in the old charcoal burner's hut if the roof has not fallen. This final detail is delivered with a shrug because frontier directions like to include tiny mysteries. You repeat the directions softly, fixing them in memory. Ridge, split cedar, stones showing, charcoal hut if needed, not the lower track. The guide nods once. That nod is worth more than the map in your pouch. The room settles around you. Wet garments hang near the heat, not too close. Boots are checked. Food is shared in small amounts. No one wastes much speech, but no one lets silence turn unfriendly. Outside, the signboard continues tapping in the wind, the sound that drew you here. Inside, you begin to feel your shoulders lower. You have survived this far not by conquering the storm, but by entering a chain of human dependence. Someone blazed the trees, someone built the hut, someone kept the fire, someone knew the ford, someone opened the door, and now sitting with a warm cup between your hands, listening to strangers become for one night the edge of your safety, you understand that in remote frontier lands survival was rarely solitary. It was passed from person to person, like a coal carried carefully through cold morning air. The warmth inside the trading post settles into your bones slowly, like a conversation you do not realize you needed until it begins. Your coat hangs near the fire, shedding small droplets that hiss when they fall too close to the heat. Your boots still damp from the creek rest where they can dry without turning into something brittle and unwearable. Around you, the quiet business of survival continues, not dramatic, not hurried, just steady. But even here in this shared shelter, the road has not released you completely. Outside in the dim yard beside the building shapes sit half buried under ice. A wagon with its wheels rimmed in frozen glaze. A low sledge runners dulled by a skin of rough frost, a stack of crates covered with stiff canvas. Transport does not disappear when the weather turns. It simply becomes more complicated, more stubborn, and occasionally more insulting. You step outside, briefly drawn by that strange need to inspect what might carry you onward. The air feels sharper now after the interior warmth, as if it resents your brief comfort. The horse turns its head toward you, ears flicking. Nearby, a man is chipping ice from the edge of a wagon wheel with slow, deliberate strikes. Each tap sends brittle shards scattering across the ground. Transport on frozen frontiers was never a single solution. Wheels runners, hooves, and human legs all took turns depending on the seasoned terrain and level of regret. In many regions, wheeled wagons became nearly useless under ice storms, their rims slipping their weight, turning every incline into an argument. Sledges, on the other hand, could glide more easily over packed snow or even rough ice, but they depended on conditions that freezing rain did not always provide. One well-established detail from frontier logistics is that sledges were often preferred for winter hauling in northern climates, because they reduced friction and distributed weight more evenly across frozen ground. However, when ice formed unevenly or melted and refroze in layers, even sledges could catch tip or veer unpredictably. The idea of smooth travel was as usual an optimistic exaggeration. You crouch beside the sledge, running your glove along the runner. It is coated in a thin, uneven crust. Someone has tried to scrape it clean, but the ice clings stubbornly. A smoother runner means easier pulling, but achieving that smoothness in these conditions requires time, tools, and patience, all of which are in short supply when daylight fades early and cold arrives without apology. A nearby traveller mutters something about runners sticking and the road turning like glass laid over stones. You nod because that is exactly what it feels like. Not smooth, not rough. Something in between, with a tendency to betray expectations at inconvenient moments. There is a peculiar practice noted in some regions where people would coat sledge runners with water, letting it freeze into a smooth layer to improve glide. Under the right conditions, this worked remarkably well, creating a slick surface that reduced drag. Under the wrong conditions, it created lumps, ridges, and a new set of problems that required more scraping than the original ice. As with many frontier solutions, success depended on timing temperature and a certain willingness to experiment with questionable ideas. Back inside, the conversation has shifted toward the road ahead. Someone mentions a wagon that attempted the lower route and had to be abandoned after its wheels locked in ice. Another speaks of a sledge that made good time until a hidden patch of thawed ground swallowed one runner and nearly tipped the load. The stories are not told for entertainment, though they do entertain in a quiet way. They are warnings shared in the currency of experience. Researchers have long examined how frontier travellers adapted their transport methods to shifting conditions, and there is no single answer. Some switched between wagons and sledges depending on the season. Others modified their equipment on the fly, adding chains, roughening surfaces, or redistributing loads. Still others relied more heavily on pack animals or human labour when machines failed. The common thread is flexibility, though it rarely felt like a choice at the time. You consider your own situation. If you had a wagon, it would likely be more burden than benefit on this ice. The horse alone carrying what it can and following careful footing feels more reliable. Simpler, perhaps, less efficient in ideal conditions, but more forgiving when the world refuses to cooperate. The man with the wagon wheel finishes his work and stands stretching his back with a quiet groan. He notices you watching and offers a brief explanation. Ice builds up unevenly, he says, throws the balance off, makes the wheel wobble, then stick, then slide. Best to clear it before it decides to make the decision for you. You thank him because even obvious advice sounds wiser when delivered by someone who has already suffered the consequences. Inside again, the fire has been fed. The room glows a little brighter. Someone has set a pot to simmer and the smell is faintly promising. Not rich, not abundant, but enough to suggest another round of warmth. You take your place near the wall where your coat has begun to soften, and your mittens have regained something like flexibility. Transport, you realize, is not just about movement. It is about timing condition and knowing when not to move. A wagon can carry more than a horse alone, but only if the road allows it. A sledge can glide, but only if the surface cooperates. A person on foot can go almost anywhere, but only slowly and not forever. There is a small, almost humorous detail from old travel accounts that some people preferred to walk beside their wagons or sledges in difficult conditions, not only to reduce the load, but also to keep warm. Riding might seem more comfortable, but sitting still in freezing weather quickly drains heat. Movement, even slow movement, generates warmth. Of course, it also generates fatigue. Everything here is a trade. The guide near the hearth looks up as the talk turns to departures. Not tonight, they say. Too much ice still shifting. Morning perhaps if the temperature holds. Better to let the world settle a little before trusting it again. No one argues. Even the most impatient traveller has learned by this point that arguing with ice is a poor strategy. You nod, accepting the delay. It is not a defeat. It is a decision, one that countless travellers have made before you. The road will still be there in the morning, though it may look entirely different. The wagon outside will still need its wheels cleared. The sledge will still need its runners smoothed. The horse will still need care and feed. And you for now need rest. You settle back, letting the warmth wrap around you, listening to the low murmur of voices, the occasional clink of tools, the soft shifting of people who have chosen for this night not to push forward. Outside, the ice holds its quiet grip on the land. Inside, the fragile system of shelter, fire, food, and shared knowledge hold you in place. Tomorrow, the question of movement will return. Tonight, stillness is the wiser companion. Night folds itself around the trading post, and the little building begins to sound larger in the dark. The walls creak. The roof answers with soft groans as ice shifts along the eaves. Somewhere outside, a loose sign taps and taps, the same patient sound that first drew you from the ridge. Inside, people settle into layers of blankets, coats, and half sleep, each person guarding a small island of warmth. Yet even as the room quiets, the world beyond it remains connected by fragile lines. You hear them before you see them, a faint humming, a thin, uneasy vibration carried through the cold air. At first you think it is wind in the chimney or a branch rubbing against the roof. Then one of the travellers near the door lifts their head and listens. Telegraph wire, they say softly, ice on it. You step outside with a lantern because curiosity is one of the more inconvenient human traits. The cold arrives immediately, slipping under your collar as if it has been waiting for you personally. Above the road beyond the yard, dark poles march away into the trees. Between them, the telegraph wires sag under bright sleeves of ice, catching lantern light in narrow silver lines. When the wind moves, the wires tremble and sing. It is a strange sound, not music exactly, more like a glass thread humming in its sleep. Beautiful, yes, but beauty has been a suspicious character throughout this journey. A plain historical truth worth remembering is that by the middle and late 19th century, telegraph lines had become vital across many frontier regions, carrying military orders, railway messages, market, news, weather reports, and personal communications far faster than riders or stagecoaches. But these lines remained physically vulnerable. Ice, wind, falling trees, and broken poles could sever entire districts from news in a single night. You stand beneath the wires and imagine messages trying to pass through the storm. A delayed shipment, a warning about a blocked pass, a request for a doctor, a family message, perhaps only a few words turned into clicks and pulses across miles of wilderness. Then ice gathers, a pole leans, a branch falls, and the great modern miracle becomes a silent strand in the dark. The guide has followed you out and stands beside the doorway, arms folded beneath a blanket. They look up at the sagging line without surprise. If wind rises, they say it may go down before morning. The words are calm, not dramatic. Just another fact placed on the table. You return inside, carrying with you the image of those shining wires. The postkeeper checks a small instrument near a shelf. if this is a station of any kind, or perhaps listens for news from a nearby office, when one of the travellers mentions the line. In some frontier settlements, telegraph equipment sat in railway depots, army posts, mining offices, or trading centres, joining remote communities to distant capitals with astonishing speed. Astonishing until the weather leaned on it. There is an odd little story from telegraph history that operators sometimes recognised bad weather from changes in the line before reports arrived. Moisture-grounding faults, ice weight and wind could affect signals, making them faint, irregular, or noisy. The wire itself became a kind of weather witness. Not always reliable, but suggestive enough to make a tired operator look out the window and say with professional gloom that trouble was coming. Inside the post, someone asks whether any message came through before the line weakened. The keeper shakes their head. Nothing since late afternoon. That means the road report from the east may be old. The warning from the north may not have arrived. Anyone expecting instructions will have to wait, which is exactly what everyone is already doing, but now with the added pleasure of uncertainty. No one loves uncertainty. Still, frontier communities lived with it constantly. Before telegraph lines, news travelled at the speed of hooves, feet, boats, sledges, and rumour. After telegraph lines, people tasted speed, then discovered how cruel interruption could feel. A message could cross hundreds of miles in minutes, or fail because one ice-weighted branch came down in a lonely stretch of forest, where no one would repair it until morning, or the next week or after the thaw. Progress, it turns out, still has weather. Some historians question whether the telegraph truly ended frontier isolation, or merely changed its texture. The wires brought distant markets, armies, newspapers, and families closer, but they also created dependence on systems that could fail abruptly. A traveller might know more about events in a capital city than about the condition of the bridge 3 miles ahead. That is a very modern kind of problem, honestly. Plenty of information, not always the one piece you need. The conversation drifts round the room. Someone remembers a line snapping in a storm and whipping across a road like a black snake. Another recalls poles so heavily iced that they leaned in a row, each pulling the next until the whole line failed. A postal rider adds that sometimes after a storm birds perched on wires and shook loose glittering fragments, as if casually repairing civilization one clawed foot at a time. Very helpful birds. Terrible wages. The telegraph also changes the emotional shape of waiting. If the line is working, people expect news. If it fails, silence becomes active. Is help delayed? Has the road closed? Did the message never leave? Has some disaster happened beyond the ridge? Or is the wire simply sulking under ice? The room seems to listen even when no one speaks. The missing clicks become a presence of their own. You sit near the fire and warm your hands around a cup. The heat is softer now, bank for night. Shadows lean along the walls. Above the low murmur of sleepers, the wire hum returns faintly whenever the wind shifts. It enters the room through memory more than sound. You find yourself thinking of all the ways travellers survived through communication before instruments existed. A blaze on a tree, a cairn on a ridge, a shouted warning at a ford, a guide's instruction, a cup of broth handed without ceremony. The telegraph is only one more attempt to send care and command across distance, and like every attempt it depends on matter. Wood poles, iron wire, glass insulators, dry hands, clear routes, men willing to climb poles in brutal weather, horses to carry repair crews, roads open enough to reach the break. The modern world, when you look closely, is full of old-fashioned necessities wearing clever hats. You think back to the burned shelter, to the ash drifting like warm snow. No wire warned you there. You read the place with your senses, then the sky, then the horse, then the creek, then the blazes, then the signboard. Each step has brought another form of message. Not all messages click through wires. Some are written in ice-smell silence and the reluctance of an animal to move forward. Later, as the room sinks deeper into sleep, the humming outside grows louder for a moment. The wind pulls at the line, and the wire sings a high, lonely note. Everyone hears it. No one rises, the note fades, the post holds. You lie back beneath your coat and blanket, listening as the night communicates in its own slow language. Fire settling, roof creaking, horse shifting outside, wire trembling between poles. Somewhere far beyond the dark trees, a message waits to move and cannot. Somewhere else, a person waits to receive it and does not know why silence has come. For now the failed line teaches the same lesson as the frozen road. Connection is precious because it can break. And in the remote frontier, cold every surviving connection, human, animal, wooden, wired, remembered or spoken, must be tended with care. Morning arrives without warmth, as if the sun has decided to observe from a safe distance rather than participate. The trading post stirs slowly. People sit up under blankets, cough, softly, rub their hands and look toward the door before they look toward one another. Everyone wants to know what the weather has become during the night. You rise carefully. Your body has stiffened in several locations you did not consult. The floor is cold through your boots. The air smells of smoke, damp wool, old leather, and the faint sourness of too many people breathing in a small room. It is not unpleasant now. It is familiar. Familiar smells can be a kind of shelter. Outside, the wires still hang iced and low but standing. The signboard taps less often. The wind has weakened. The road, however, glows under a hard new crust. Nothing about it suggests generosity. Before anyone talks of departure, people examine themselves and one another. Hands, feet, faces, ears. These small exposed places where cold takes liberties. A man near the hearth unwraps his bandaged hand and studies two swollen fingers with quiet irritation. A woman by the wall warms a child's feet between her palms. The guide checks a patch of skin on a traveller's cheek, pressing gently, then nodding when colour returns. These gestures are ordinary and intimate, like stitching life back into the morning. One accepted medical fact from cold weather history is that frostbite often begins with numbness and pale or waxy skin, meaning the injured person may not feel the danger clearly while it is happening. Frontier travellers learn to watch one another, because the body can hide its own distress. A cheek can freeze while the person wearing it is busy talking. An ear can grow dangerously pale while its owner worries about the horse. Very unfair, but the body is not always a considerate correspondent. You check your own fingers. They ache as they warm a deep, prickling discomfort that feels almost personal. Pain in this case is not entirely bad. Pain means sensation still speaks. You flex each finger slowly. The joints resist, then obey. Your toes are less communicative. You stamp lightly, not hard enough to bruise chilled flesh, but enough to encourage blood back into them. Someone sets warm water near the fire and another warns against putting numb hands too close to flame. Cold tissue needs gradual warmth. Too much heat too quickly can damage what the cold has already weakened. This is the kind of practical knowledge that rarely fits into heroic paintings. No one paints the brave traveller being told gently but firmly not to roast their fingers like sausages. Perhaps they should. There is a strange old remedy found in various winter accounts where people rubbed frost-bitten skin with snow. It was once widely repeated, and you can understand the logic if you squint at it in a candle-lit room with no modern training. Cold treats cold, perhaps. But rubbing frozen tissue can worsen injury, especially if ice crystals have already formed in the skin. Many older practices were born from observation, but not all observations led to kindness. The past is not automatically wise. It is experienced, which is not always the same thing. Beyond frostbite lies the quieter danger of general chilling. People may call it exhaustion, sleepiness, weakness, confusion, or simply being done. You notice how one traveller sits too still, staring into the fire with a slack face. The postkeeper gives them broth and insists they drink. No ceremony, no lecture, just broth blanket and attention. The person blinks, sips, and slowly returns to the room, Medical historians have differed over how often deaths recorded as exposure apoplexy fatigue or misadventure in frontier documents would now be understood as hypothermia. The terminology varied by region and era, and many accounts lacked careful detail. What is clear is that cold did not always strike dramatically. Sometimes it simply slowed. Thought softened urgency, and made rest feel more appealing than survival. That is one of its crueler tricks. It makes danger feel like permission to sleep. You remember how the fire last night made the stones into a room. Without it, and without the post that sleepiness might have visited you in the open, it would not have arrived wearing a villain's mask. It would have sounded reasonable. Sit a moment. Close your eyes, just until the wind drops. Travellers feared that voice. They also sometimes obeyed it. Breakfast is plain and purposeful, hot liquid. A little bread softened near the fire, perhaps porridge stretched thin, perhaps beans revived from last night, perhaps a piece of meat sliced with more optimism than abundance. Warm food helps hands and mood alike. People eat slowly, watching the door, measuring strength against intention. The bandaged hand belongs to a wagon driver who tried to clear ice from a wheel without removing his wet glove. The glove froze stiff, he says, and by the time he noticed his fingertips had stopped hurting, trouble had already begun. He tells it with a shrug, as people often do when frightened by their own mistakes. The others listen without mockery. Every person here has made some mistake. The room is warm because everyone has decided for the moment not to list them. Illness also travelled with winter crowds. Small rooms, damp clothes, poor ventilation, smoke, hunger and exhaustion made coughs linger. A frontier shelter could save you from the storm while sharing every cold and fever brought in by the road. You hear coughing in the corners. Someone spits into the ashes. Someone else wraps a scarf more tightly and insists they are fine in the ancient tone that means they are not. The guide advises delaying the weakest traveller and sending word ahead when the line returns or when someone reaches the next post. This is met with silence, because delay carries cost. Food, money, missed business, pride, anxiety. But leaving a weakened person to struggle on ice may cost more. The room weighs this without saying all of it aloud. You step outside to check the horse. It is standing, thank goodness, with frost along its mane and whiskers. You run your hands along its legs, checking for swelling cuts, ice-packed near the hooves. The animal shifts but allows it. Its warmth under the coat is reassuring. You offer feed if there is any, and it eats with calm concentration. Animals can hide distress too, but they also reveal much through appetite stance and the look of the eye. A dull eye worries a traveller more than a complaint. Your own body complains as you bend, back, knees, shoulders, all have opinions. Sleep on a floor beside strangers and a stove and you discover that comfort is a delicate modern treaty. Still you are functioning. Your hands move, your feet bear weight. Your mind is clear enough to mistrust itself, which is a useful level of clarity. Inside again, preparations resume. Dry socks are traded. A strip of cloth becomes a wrap. A needle repairs a torn mitten. Someone shares salve. Someone else refuses help, then accepts it when no one makes a fuss. This is how panic is managed on the frontier, not always by speeches, but by small acts that keep the body organised. You pack, slowly placing food where it will not freeze too hard tinder, where it will stay dry, and the map where damp cannot reach it. Each item has become part of your health. Fire making is health. Dry cloth is health. A horse with sound legs is health. A guide's warning is health. Survival is not one heroic possession, but many ordinary things kept from failing at once. Before leaving, the guide looks at your face in the grey light and points to your scarf. Cover higher when the wind turns, they say. Your cheek marked pale yesterday. You had not noticed. You touch the spot now and feel a faint tenderness. The body has been keeping records while you were busy. You thank them. The words feel small, but small words often carry well in cold air. At the door you pause and look back. The fire, the bandaged hand, the child's feet wrapped in warmed cloth, the steaming cups, the travellers deciding who can move and who must wait. The room is not merely shelter from weather, it is a clinic, stable, kitchen, council and confession booth, all smelling strongly of smoke. Then you step outside where the road shined ahead under its hard bright skin, and you carry with you the quiet knowledge that the most dangerous cold is not always the cold you feel. Sometimes it is the cold you stop feeling. So you flex your fingers, cover your cheek, listen to your body with new humility and prepare to move before stillness becomes too persuasive. You leave the trading post with the others still arranging themselves around the morning, some preparing to travel, some admitting they cannot, and some pretending the choice is still open. The guide's warning about your cheek lingers with you as you pull the scarf higher. The horse steps carefully beside you, rested but cautious, and the road ahead shines with that same polished uncertainty. Not far beyond the post, the track rises through a scatter of birch and pine, and you fall into a slower rhythm. Step test, breathe. Step test, breathe. The world has become a long lesson in not assuming the next patch of ground will behave like the last. It is quiet enough that your thoughts begin to drift toward the people, whose stories were often written in the margins of journeys like this. Women travelled these roads too, not as decorations in the background, not as fragile passengers waiting politely for history to notice them, but as workers, planners, riders, walkers, mothers, traders, healers, servants, missionaries, settlers, innkeepers, guides, letter carriers, and sometimes simply people trying to get from one dangerous place to another, slightly less dangerous place. They crossed ice storms with children under blankets, with account books wrapped against damp, with food to ration, with stockings to dry, with animals to manage, and with men nearby often receiving the credit for everyone's survival. History can be very generous with beards. A solid historical point here is that many 19th century women's diaries from frontier regions describe practical winter labour in detail, including mending clothing, managing food stores, tending fires, nursing the sick, caring for livestock and preparing for travel. These tasks may sound domestic, but in an east storm they were survival systems. A torn mitten, an empty kettle, a neglected horse, or a wet child's blanket could change the outcome of a journey. You imagine a woman on this same road, perhaps sitting in a jolting sledge, perhaps walking beside it to keep warm, lifting her skirts clear of ice when she can and enduring the frozen hem when she cannot. If she wears wool, it holds warmth but grows heavy. If she wears layers of petticoats, they trap air, but they also catch on brush and stiffen near the ground. If she carries a baby, the child must be kept warm without smothering, fed without exposing too much, skin calmed, while adults pretend not to be afraid. Very simple, obviously. Just manage everything at once while freezing. The road narrows and you guide the horse around a fallen limb. Its branches are encased in ice so clear that each twig looks preserved under glass. You think of hands gathering fuel, women's hands as often as men's sorting what was dry enough to burn, saving ashes, banking coals, keeping a hearth alive through nights when relighting it would be difficult. Fire was labour before it was comfort. There is an unusual note in some travel journals and household accounts that women used warmed stones, bricks, flat irons, or even heated potatoes wrapped in cloth to warm beds, wagons, and children's feet. The potato, after serving as a heater, might become food. This is efficient, faintly funny, and slightly humbling. Modern luxury rarely asks a root vegetable to multitask so heroically. You pause at a small rise where the wind crosses the road from the east. It slips under your scarf, and for a moment your eyes water. You imagine trying to keep a journal in this weather ink, thickening fingers numb, pages damp at the edges. Yet many women did write sometimes with astonishing restraint. Cold today. Roads bad. Baby fretful. Mr. H. anxious about oxen. Such brief lines may contain a whole universe of discomfort. The understatement is almost aggressive. You respect it. Modern scholars differ as whether women's frontier writings reveal a hidden culture of endurance or whether later readers romanticize suffering by calling it resilience. The distinction matters. To endure hardship is not the same as choosing it freely. Many women travelled because family economics, war migration, enslavement, marriage labour, contracts, mission work or displacement left few alternatives. Their courage was real, but so were the constraints around it. You continue uphill following the blazes the guide described. The split cedar should appear before the descent. Your boots grip better on the rougher ground, though ice still hides in root shadows. The horse breathes close behind your shoulder. You think of women who knew animals well, who drove teams, milked cows in freezing yards, rubbed down horses, fed chickens through storms, and noticed illness before others did. In many accounts, women's knowledge of animals is tucked into ordinary sentences as if it were not expertise. But keeping creatures alive through winter is expertise whether or not anyone writes a medal about it. At the next bend you find evidence of earlier travellers, a strip of blue cloth caught on a thorn, a broken basket rib, a small scatter of straw frozen into the rut, perhaps from a family wagon, perhaps from a trader's load. You cannot know. You pick up the cloth and feel its stiffness. Some garment tore here, someone kept moving. Clothing shaped women as winter travel in particular ways. Long skirts could provide warmth, but they also absorbed moisture and froze. Stay shawls, aprons, cloaks, knitted hoods, stockings and boots all formed part of the survival arrangement. In some regions, women adopted local garments better suited to cold, including moccasins, fur caps, blanket coats, or divided riding skirts. Practicality has always been good at defeating fashion, though fashion usually complains first. You remember the earlier lesson about wool and damp, and you imagine the endless work of drying garments in crowded rooms like the post behind you, steam rising from hems, children's socks hanging from lines, gloves turned inside out, boots stuffed with straw. Women often managed this quiet choreography, not because they were naturally suited to damp laundry, thank you very much, but because households and travel parties depended on it. The split cedar appears at last, its trunk divided into two dark arms, each coated with ice along the windward side. You stop beside it and check the route. The guide said to descend where stones show through. You scan the slope until you see them grey backs emerging from the crust like sleeping animals. That is your way down. Before descending, you rest a moment in the cedar's lee. The wind softens. Your horse lowers its head. The ice above clicks gently. You think of all the unnamed women whose decisions may never have entered official reports. Stop here, not there. Feed the child now. Save the dry cloth. Do not cross at dusk. Ask the guide again. Mend the strap before it breaks. Keep the coals alive. History often preserves battles and treaties more carefully than these small commands. But in weather like this, such commands are civilization. You begin the descent. The stones provide grip and the horse follows carefully. Your staff taps, your scarf holds, your cheek stays covered. Beneath the slow movement, you carry a new awareness of the people who endured the same cold while carrying more than packs. They carried household expectations, children tools, food letters, grief and duty. The road ahead bends toward lower timber, and the post disappears behind the ridge. Its warmth remains in memory along with the women by the hearth, the child's feet in warmed hands, the quiet work no storm could pause for long. You move forward with that memory beside you, understanding that survival on the frontier was not only a tale of strong boots and brave crossings, it was also the patient repeated labour of keeping life bundled, fed, mended, warmed and ready to continue. The descent carries you into lower timber where the air changes again. It grows stiller, thicker, scented with resin, damp bark, old smoke, and the faint animal warmth of your horse beside you. The stones underfoot give way to a softer track, not safe exactly, but less polished than the exposed ridge. You follow it with gratitude, kept modest because the road has punished confidence before, Ahead through the dark trunks you see another structure. At first you think it may be the charcoal burner's hut the guide mentioned, the one offered with that excellent frontier phrase, "if the roof has not fallen." Then the trees open and the building becomes clearer, larger than a hut, lower than a proper inn. A trading post or winter storehouse perhaps, set beside a rough yard where sledges, barrels, hides, broken wheels and cordwood gather under ice. Smoke rises from its chimney in a thicker line than yesterday's post. More people are here. The sight should comfort you, and it does. But it also means delay. Where people gather in winter news gathers too, along with arguments, debts, smells, rumours, damp stockings, and the general emotional complexity of being trapped indoors with strangers who chew loudly. You lead the horse toward the yard. A dog trots out, then stops at a safe distance and barks twice as if completing paperwork. A man near the woodpile lifts an axe in greeting or warning or both. You answer with a raised hand. The door opens, releasing a breath of warm air and the mingled scent of smoke stew, tallow candles, unwashed wool, tobacco, wet leather, and something sweet, perhaps molasses or dried apples, being coaxed into usefulness. Inside the room is crowded. People sit on benches, crates, rolled blankets, and whatever surfaces have not already been claimed by trade goods. Bundles hang from rafters. Snowshoes, traps, saddles, sacks of grain, coils of rope, folded skins, and tin cups occupy every corner. A counter runs along one side, behind which the keeper moves with the calm exhaustion of someone who's been answering the same question for 2 days. No, the North Road is not open. No, the courier has not come. No credit is not improved by explaining the storm at greater length. A clear fact from frontier life is that trading posts often served many roles at once. They were supply points, shelters, warehouses, news centres, informal courts, repair shops, and meeting places between travellers, traders, indigenous communities, soldiers, settlers, and local workers. In severe weather, these places could become temporary villages held together by firewood accounts, patience, and the hope that the roof would continue being a roof. You find a place near the wall and begin the familiar ritual. Outer coat off, ice shaken loose, mittens opened, boots inspected, pack placed where it will not be kicked into the fire, horse arranged outside with whatever shelter and feed can be found. Every arrival repeats the same quiet choreography, and every person already inside watches with the experienced sympathy of those who performed it earlier, and are pleased privately not to be doing it right now. The keeper's assistant, a young person with red hands and quick eyes, brings you a cup of something hot. You thank them. It tastes of barley salt and smoke. You do not ask too many questions. Warm liquid is allowed its mysteries. The room hums with low talk. A trader worries over a ledger, licking a thumb to turn pages before remembering that cold ink and fingers have formed a hostile alliance. 2 teamsters debate whether sledges can pass the marsh track. An elderly woman mends a torn strap with thread so dark it vanishes into the leather. A child sleeps on a folded coat beneath the counter, mouth open, cheeks flushed from heat. Near the hearth, 3 people lean over a map weighing every line against reports from those who have actually been outside, which is always a useful correction to ink. An odd little detail from some posts and winter camps is that gossip could become a survival tool. Who had hay? Who had fever? Which bridge had dropped? Which guide had been drinking? Which family still had flour? Which shortcut was a trap? Information moved through jokes, complaints, scoldings, prayers, and casual remarks while people dried socks. A careless listener heard chatter. A careful traveller heard tomorrow's route. You listen carefully. The ice storm has sealed these road under fallen timber. The lower marsh, despite looking smooth, has swallowed one sledge runner and cracked another. The telegraph line is down beyond the second pole from the ridge, so no message has gone farther west since morning. A courier may be sent if the weather holds. The word if returns again and again, sitting beside every plan like an uninvited accountant. Discussion continues among historians about whether trading posts in frontier memory have been softened into cosy symbols of shelter, when in reality they were also places of pressure, debt, cultural conflict, disease, and unequal exchange. The warmth was real. So were the ledgers. A traveller might find safety by the fire and still leave owing more than expected. A local hunter might trade essential knowledge for goods priced by someone else. A post could save lives and tighten dependence in the same breath. You feel that complexity in the room. The keeper is kind enough, but every scoop of grain, every strip of cloth, every repair, every cup beyond charity enters a book. Survival has accounting. It always has. Even the firewood was cut by someone's cold hands. Still the post holds the storm at bay. People share benches, pass tools, lend advice, and make room where no room exists. A woman from a nearby settlement directs 2 men to move wet boots away from the sleeping child before they drip onto the coat. They obey because she says it in the tone of a person who has kept order through worse. The elderly strap mender looks up and asks where you cross the creek. You tell her. She nods once and says you chose better than the lower ford. Praise in this setting is served plain. Hours pass in the slow manner of storm-bound places. No one can quite leave. No one fully rests. The outside world keeps pressing at the door through every new arrival and every fresh report. A man comes in with ice in his beard and news of trees cracking along the ridge. 2 boys drag in a bundle of branches for kindling, proud and shivering. Someone starts a pot of beans. Someone else complains that beans require time, and the room collectively ignores this, because complaining about beans does not make them cook faster. You help where you can. You carry wood. You turn damp socks near the heat. You hold a lantern while a cracked sledge pin is repaired with wire or hide, and language kept mostly polite for the child's sake. The repair will not last forever, but it may last long enough. Long enough is another frontier blessing, like enough food, enough warmth, enough daylight. As evening approaches, the keeper decides no one should attempt the west track until morning. The announcement meets grumbling but not rebellion. The window glass has begun to frost from the inside. Outside, the sky has lowered again, a bruised grey pressing through the trees. The first new pellets of frozen rain tick against the shutters, delicate and final. So you are storm-bound. The word settles over the room, not as disaster, but as instruction. People rearrange themselves. Food is measured. Animals checked. Wet garments shifted. Space near the fire negotiated with the care of diplomats. Stories begin low and wandering. Not grand stories yet. Practical ones. Roads. Horses. A roof that collapsed one March. A man who carried coals in a covered kettle for 6 miles. A woman who saved a whole party by refusing to let them cross a lake at dusk. Heads nod. The pietist sits down among you. You take your place near the wall, back against rough logs, cup warm between your hands. The trading post breathes around you, crowded, smoky, imperfect, alive. Beyond the shutters, ice taps softly, adding another layer to the world. You're not moving tonight. No one is. And after so many miles of uncertain road, there is strange comfort in surrendering to a shelter that smells of stew smoke, damp wool, and human stubbornness. You let the room's low murmur carry you while outside the storm resumes its delicate work, polishing the land for morning. The frozen rain keeps tapping on the shutters, light and persistent, as if the storm has decided to practice music rather than violence. Inside the trading post, the lamps burn low. Shadows gather in the rafters among hanging traps, folded hides and bundles tied with cord. The room smells of beans, smoke-damp wool, horse-tack tallow, and sleep arriving slowly from every corner. When people cannot travel, stories begin to travel for them. At first, the talk remains practical. Which road floods first? Which ridge holds wind? Which horse has a tender leg? Which man still owes for oats a detail mentioned with the gentle sharpness of someone who has not forgotten. Then, as the darkness thickens and the storm seals the room more completely from the world outside, the stories loosen. They move from fact to warning, from warning to memory, from memory to something older and stranger. You sit near the wall cup in hand listening. Someone speaks of lights seen over frozen marshes, pale flames dancing where no human camp could be. Another mentions a bell heard in snow where no church stood within 30 miles. A third says that if tree ice cracks 3 times before dawn, a thaw will come within 2 days. The elderly woman who mended the strap snorts softly at this, then admits her grandmother believed the same thing, which is, how many old beliefs survive? Public doubt, private attention. A widely recognised feature of frontier life is that folklore often helped people organise danger in landscapes where formal information was scarce. Weather signs, animal omens, saints' days, spirit warnings, charms, and local legends gave travellers ways to remember risks, pass along advice, and make uncertainty feel less shapeless. Not every tale was literally true. That was not always the point. A frightening story could keep a foolish person indoors, and that alone gave it practical value. The guide by the hearth listens without interrupting, sharpening a small knife with slow strokes. The sound is soft, almost soothing. Scrape, pause, scrape. Firelight moves across their hands. After a while, they tell the story of a winter trail, where travellers sometimes heard footsteps behind them on hard snow. If they turned, nothing was there. If they kept walking steadily, they reached shelter. But if they ran, they lost the path. No one asks whether the story is true. The meaning is clear enough. Panic is a poor guide. You think of your own steps from the burned shelter, the hollow, the creek, the blazed trees. Had a story warned you against each mistake, would you have obeyed sooner? Perhaps. People rarely remember plain instructions as well as eerie ones. Do not cross thin ice at dusk is sensible. The river takes those who step on it after the crows fall silent has a little more grip on the mind. Slightly dramatic, yes, but useful. There is an unusual belief recorded in several cold regions that carrying a piece of iron, a nail knife, horseshoe fragment, or small tool could ward off harmful spirits or bad luck on lonely roads. To a modern ear this sounds superstitious, yet iron was also useful. A knife cuts cord scrapes, tinder repairs, harness tests ice. A nail can mend a shoe or fasten a broken strap. The charm and the tool live together. Very efficient of the supernatural really to choose something practical. The room grows quieter as the stories deepen. A teamster tells of a white animal seen before storms, sometimes a deer, sometimes a dog, sometimes a horse without rider. A woman near the counter answers with a tale from her people of winter, beings that punish arrogance in the cold. She tells it gently without performance, and the room listens with unusual care. In her version, the danger is not only freezing, but taking more than you need, ignoring elders, mocking the weather, or travelling as if the land were empty. The lesson settles heavily because everyone here knows the land is not empty. It is full of tracks, names, claims, graves, camps, debts, and memories. Folklorists continue to examine whether such stories should be read mainly as spiritual belief, environmental instruction, social discipline, entertainment, or all of these at once. The question remains open because folklore refuses to sit neatly in one drawer. A tale may frighten children, teach route safety, honour ancestors, warn outsiders, and pass the evening while beans soften in the pot. It can do all that without asking permission from academic categories. Outside, ice slides from the roof and lands with a soft crash. Several people glance upward, then settle again. The child beneath the counter stirs but does not wake. The storm's presence makes every story more believable. It is easy to doubt omens in daylight beside a good road. It is harder when the shutters glitter, the wires are silent, and the dark presses its cold face to the walls. Someone mentioned saints and holy days, how travellers in Catholic regions might invoke St. Christopher for journeys, St. Nicholas for sailors and children, or local protectors whose names varied from valley to valley. Others speak of prayers said before crossing rivers, charms sewn into clothing psalms carried in pockets, or Bible verses recited when the road disappeared. Faith like fire could be shared, guarded, and sometimes argued over. It did not melt the ice, but it steadied the hand. Another traveller laughs quietly and says his uncle trusted no saint as much as a dry pair of socks. This earns a few tired smiles. The elderly woman says a dry pair of socks may indeed be a saint if properly respected. You consider this and decide not to object. After the creek crossing, you are prepared to honour dry socks in any reasonable tradition. The stories turn to remedies, onion poultices for coughs, grease rubbed on cheeks before wind, whiskey for cold which receives several approving noises and one firm correction from the keeper, who says whiskey may warm the mood, but not the body for long, pine needle tea for strength, willow bark for pain, hot stones wrapped in cloth, smoke to drive out bad air. Some remedies helped, some comforted. Some probably made matters worse with great confidence. You remember the old idea of rubbing frostbitten skin with snow and feel a quiet shiver not entirely from cold. The past carried wisdom and error together, bundled like damp garments near a fire. A careful traveller listened, tested and survived long enough to revise. In the corner a man describes a road charm used by wagoners never speak too proudly of good weather, until the animals are fed and the wheels are blocked. This sounds less like magic and more like hard-earned humility. The room approves. Pride has not performed well in recent conditions. The guide finally speaks again, not with a tale this time, but with a memory. Years earlier, after an ice storm, a party ignored a warning because the sky had cleared. They chose the lower route, the easy-looking road, and spent the night trapped between flooded ice and falling timber. They survived, but only because someone returned to the post and brought help. Since then, the guide says, whenever the sky clears too beautifully after freezing rain, they wait for the trees to finish breaking. No one jokes at that. You think of the sparkling forest, the branch that fell behind you, the creek that kept moving under its polite glass. The guide's rule is not folklore exactly yet, it has the shape of it. A memory polished into warning. A warning carried forward until it becomes tradition. The storm taps more softly now. Perhaps the freezing rain is easing, or perhaps the shutters have grown accustomed to it. The beans are finally ready, and bowls move around the room. Warmth rises with the steam. Conversation thins as people eat. Folklore, like hunger, has been satisfied for the moment. You hold the bowl in both hands and let the heat press into your palms. Around you the stories remain in the air mingled with smoke. Some are doubtful, some are wise, some are both. You understand now why travellers carried more than food maps and tinder. They carried sayings, warnings, charms, prayers, jokes, and eerie little tales that made the cold easier to name. Tomorrow when you step back onto the road you may not believe in ghostly footsteps behind you. But you will remember not to run. You may not trust every ring around the moon, but you will look up. You may smile at the idea of dry socks as saints, but you will guard yours carefully. And as the lamps lower and the trading post settles into a crowded hush, the old stories curl around the room like another blanket, thin in places, patched in others, but warm enough to last until morning. Morning comes with a softer light, not warm but less hostile. The shutters glow pale around their edges and the trading post wakes in slow layers. A cough, a boot scraping the floor, a child murmuring from under a coat, someone stirring ashes, someone else opening the door just enough to look out, then closing it quickly with the expression of a person who has seen weather and found it still employed. The freezing rain has stopped. For a moment this feels like victory. Then you step outside and see what the storm has left behind. The yard is transformed. Barrels wear clear helmets of ice. Ropes hang stiff as carved wood. The sledges in the yard glitter along their runners. The wagon wheels are sealed again in frozen ridges. Every fence rail looks polished. Every stump shines. Beyond, the post trees lean under heavy crystal loads, and the road is scattered with fallen branches, some small, some large enough to block a team. The world is beautiful in a way that means extra work. You stand very still and listen. The forest is waking into damage. Ice begins dropping from upper limbs as the temperature shifts. It falls in sudden showers, clicking through branches, landing with brittle patters on the crust below. Farther away, a larger limb cracks and comes down with a wooden crash. No one in the yard looks surprised. This is the aftermath beneath the thaw when the storm's delayed bills begin arriving. A practical historical reality is that ice storms often cause severe damage to roads, orchards, telegraph lines, barns, fences, and livestock enclosures in frontier regions, not only during the precipitation itself, but also during the thaw and wind that followed. The danger continued after the sky cleared. Branches broke, roofs leaked, animals went hungry under sealed forage, and travellers found familiar routes newly blocked. People move into tasks without much discussion. The keeper sends 2 workers to clear the woodpile. A teamster checks harness leather. The elderly woman inspects the repaired strap from last night. Someone climbs carefully to knock ice from the edge of a shed roof before the weight can drag it down. The guide walks the road entrance, studying fallen timber and the quality of the crust. You help where you can, because food, shelter and advice have made you part of this small morning economy. You carry branches away from the yard, dragging them to a pile where they can later become fuel if they dry, if they are cut, if the next storm does not come first. There is always an if. It follows frontier labour like a loyal but irritating dog. The first branch you lift is heavier than expected. Ice thickens every twig. Your gloves slip on the smooth casing. When you shake it, shards scatter around your boots like broken glass. You drag it slowly, hearing it scrape over the frozen ground. Your shoulders complain. You remind them that everyone is busy. There is an unusual detail from rural ice storm aftermaths that farmers sometimes use long poles to tap branches from a distance, trying to bring down dangerous ice before animals or people passed beneath. This could work, but it could also bring down more than intended, including the branch itself, which is a fairly pointed criticism from nature. Still clearing danger in a controlled way was better than trusting gravity to choose a convenient moment. At the stable side of the post, livestock have their own troubles. Hay stored under cover is precious. Grass outside is sealed. A goat noses helplessly at iced brush. The horses stand restless, their breath rising in thick clouds. One animal has a cut along its leg where ice or broken crust scraped it. The wound is not terrible, but it needs cleaning. Small injuries grow larger on the road, especially when cold numbs attention. The keeper counts feed with a face that reveals nothing cheerful. Ice storms did not only threaten travellers, they threatened entire local systems. Animals needed food. People needed wood. Trade goods needed transport. Messages needed repair. A blocked road could mean delayed flour, delayed mail, delayed medicine, delayed news of birth, death, debt, or danger. The aftermath was not one event. It spread outward. Economic historians have debated whether frontier communities were more vulnerable to single weather shocks, because they had fewer stored reserves, or more resilient because they were accustomed to improvisation and mutual aid. The answer varies by place, wealth, season, and social ties. A well-stocked post with strong neighbours might absorb the damage. A poor household already low on fodder could be pushed into crisis by the same storm. Weather is natural. Its consequences are never only natural. You walk with the guide a little way down the road. The surface is bad, but not impossible. The ice has crusted over mud in some places and formed hard ridges in others. A wagon would struggle. A light sledge might pass if the runners are cleared and the team steady. A rider on horseback could manage with care, though every falling branch argues for patience. The guide points toward a place where the road disappears under a tangle of limbs. That will need clearing before any loaded transport moves through. You both stop beneath open sky, avoiding the trees. From here the damaged forest looks almost ceremonial. Each branch holds light. Each broken limb reveals pale wood inside. The air smells fresh, sharp, and faintly green where living branches have split. It is a sad smell, clean and raw. You think of orchards in settled districts after such storms, apple trees, cracked young fruitwood broken under ice. You think of telegraph crews walking lines through cold fields. You think of families mending roofs, hauling water, finding animals trapped behind frozen gates. The traveller suffers the road, but residents inherit the aftermath. Back at the post, someone has found a section of roof where water entered during the freeze. Bedding stored beneath it is damp. People carry blankets outside, briefly hoping pale sun and wind can do something useful. The blankets hang stiff at first, then begin to soften. Steam rises faintly. The child from under the counter laughs at the sight of a blanket standing almost by itself. The adults smile because children are allowed to find comedy where adults find laundry. You check your own gear again. Food remains. Tinder dry. Socks acceptable. Coat drying. Horse steady. The list feels almost ceremonial now. Each item confirms that you may continue, but not yet. The road must be cleared. The guide says late morning perhaps. Better after the falling ice slows. You accept this more easily than you might have 2 days ago. The storm has improved your manners. As the morning lengthens, the post becomes a repair yard. A sledge runner is scraped smooth. A wagon wheel is freed. A cracked pole is bound with rawhide that will shrink tight as it dries. Telegraph talk returns when a man arrives from the ridge saying one line is down beyond the bend pinned by a maple limb. No message will pass until crews reach it. News remains frozen in place just like the road. People receive this with sighs, not shock. They have learned the rhythm: storm, shelter, damage, repair, delay. Then movement again if movement is wise. You stand at the edge of the yard watching ice fall from the roof in slow glittering sheets. The sound is gentle now, almost like applause from an audience too sleepy to commit. The world is letting go bit by bit. Not healed, not safe, just beginning the long work of returning to ordinary, and that you realize is the true aftermath. Survival does not end when you reach shelter, or when the rain stops, or when morning brightens the shutters. It continues in the clearing of roads, the feeding of horses, the drying of blankets, the checking of wounds, the mending of roofs, the waiting for wires to speak again. So you wait a little longer, not with impatience, but with the calm of someone who has finally understood that the frontier road is never only crossed. It is repaired under your feet as you go. By the time the road is partly cleared, the storm has already begun changing shape in memory. You notice it happening before anyone admits it. One traveller says the ice was as thick as a man's thumb on every branch. Another says no, not every branch, only the exposed ones. Someone claims the wind began before midnight. Someone else insists it was closer to dawn. A teamster swears the creek crossing below the ridge is safe if approached from the west. The guide gives him a look so calm and flat that the statement quietly freezes and falls away. Memory like ice forms in layers. You stand near the yard with your horse saddled or packed, listening as people prepare to part. The post has held everyone in one warm, crowded present, but the moment travel resumes, each person begins carrying away a private version of what happened. The burned shelter, the creek, the telegraph wire, the stories at night, the cracked road, the damaged roof. All of it will be sorted, polished, shortened, exaggerated, softened or sharpened, depending on who tells it and why. A reliable point from the study of frontier records is that diaries, letters, newspapers, military reports and oral histories often describe the same weather event differently. Some accounts focus on travel delays, others count property damage, others remember hunger, fear, illness animals or acts of help. Official records may reduce a frightening night to one dry line about roads being impassable. A diary may spend 3 pages on wet socks. Honestly, the diary may understand the situation better. You lead the horse toward the road entrance while the guide speaks with the keeper. A small group intends to move west together at least until the road divides. Travel in company is slower, but after an ice storm, slower has gained prestige. A lone rider may pass narrow places more easily, but a group can clear branches, help a fallen animal share tools, and confirm whether a memory is lying. A woman near the door tells someone that the storm was the worst in 10 years. The keeper replies that people said the same thing 3 years ago. They both smile faintly. This is not dismissal, it is recognition. Weather becomes a measuring stick for personal time. Worse since the winter the roof fell. Worse since the baby was born. Worse since old Martin lost his team. Worse since the telegraph first came through. Dates matter, but lived markers cling more tightly. There is a curious habit in many old newspapers of turning storms into moral lessons. Survivors were praised for courage, the careless were gently, or not so gently blamed, and communities were congratulated for resilience, even when the actual story was messy, unequal, and full of luck. A traveller who stopped early became prudent. A traveller who pressed on and survived became brave. A traveller who pressed on and failed became a warning. The action might be nearly the same. The ending changed the moral. History can be a little unfair that way. Writers of the past are still being reinterpreted by modern scholars, especially when it comes to whose memories were preserved. Literate travellers, officials, missionaries, merchants, and officers left many written traces. Labourers' servants, indigenous guides, enslaved or displaced people, children and many women often appear only briefly if at all, unless their words were recorded by someone else. So when you ask what survivors remembered, you must also ask who was allowed to leave a record. The road beyond the post is rough, but passable in the loosest sense. Branches lie stacked along the side where workers dragged them. Ice still shines in every rut. The telegraph line sags in the distance, one wire low enough to catch light through the trees. The group moves quietly at first. Hooves click, runners scrape, boots crunch and slide. No one has the energy for cheerful departure. The post recedes behind you, smoke thinning above its roof, already becoming a landmark in the mind. One man begins retelling the story of the wire humming in the night. In his version, the sound was loud enough to wake everyone. You remember it differently. It was faint. People stirred, yes, but not everyone woke. Still, his version carries the feeling of it, the eerie tension of a modern line singing under ice. Is emotional accuracy the same as factual accuracy? A dangerous question for a cold road, but there it is. You pass the broken maple that took down part of the line. Its limb lies heavy across the ditch, glazed and massive. Seeing it fixes the story in place. The line did fall just as reported. The silence was not imagined. Someone will have to cut that branch, raise the wire, test the signal, and restore the thin thread of distant speech. Until then, every story moving along this road travels by mouth. The guide points toward a shallow depression where water lies under cloudy ice. That they say is where a sledge went down last year, though not in this storm. A teamster corrects them and says it was 2 years ago. The guide shrugs. Last year, 2 years, the mud is still there. This is a practical approach to chronology. The date may be disputed, the danger remains current. You think of oral histories held in families and communities, repeated over tables, fires, and work sites. They may shift in small details, but they preserve roots of meaning. Do not take the lower marsh after freezing rain. Do not trust bright ice near reeds. Stop when the trees begin cracking. Feed horses before arguing. Cover the cheek when the east wind turns. These lessons do not need a perfect timestamp to save a life. At a bend, the road opens briefly onto a view of the valley. The ice storm has written itself across the land in glittering strokes. Fences sag. A shed roof bows. Trees lean over the creek. Farther away, smoke rises from 2 cabins, thin and steady. People there will have their own versions. Perhaps they slept through the worst of it. Perhaps they spent the night holding a roof beam in place. Perhaps they will say travellers always exaggerate road hardship. Perhaps they are right sometimes. Annoyingly, people can be right in ways that do not help. A remembered storm also changes with purpose. A merchant may recall lost goods. A mother may recall keeping children warm. A guide may recall the foolishness of outsiders. A postal rider may recall delay in duty. A newspaper may recall spectacle. A later historian may search all of these for patterns, then discover that the most revealing detail is a casual note about thawing socks by the stove. You smile at that thought. The past has grand events, but it also has socks. Do not underestimate socks. Dry socks have already been nominated for sainthood, and you're not withdrawing support. The group slows where a fallen pine crosses part of the track. Together people cut and drag enough branches aside for passage. The work is awkward. Ice clings, gloves slip, breath rises. Someone mutters that in 10 years this will be remembered as a grand adventure. Someone else says they are already prepared to forget it entirely. Both are lying gently. When the way clears, you move on. The rhythm returns. Step test breathe. Hoof scrape pause. The road is becoming a corridor of stories as much as a path through trees. Every mark will be explained later. Every choice may be justified. Every fear may be reduced to a joke, because jokes are easier to carry than fear. Yet you know what you felt. The ash at the burned shelter, the hollow silence, the creak tugging at your boots, the cup warming your hands, the wire humming, the stories beside the beans, the pale patch on your cheek you never noticed until someone else did. These memories settle inside you, not perfectly arranged, but alive. And as you continue along the thawing road, you understand that survival is never remembered whole. It is remembered in fragments bright as ice on branches, each one catching a different light. The road improves by degrees, which is to say it remains difficult but begins to feel less personally offended by your presence. The group spreads out where the track widens, then gathers again whenever branches block the way, or ice hides beneath the shadow of trees. You keep the horse close, watching its steps, watching the sky, watching the people ahead, who have already become temporary companions in the old frontier way. By midday the air softens slightly. Not warm exactly. Let us not become extravagant. But the ice begins to drip from twigs in bright irregular drops. The forest changes from glass to water. The sound is everywhere, 1,000 tiny taps on crust, bark, cloth and leather. It feels like the land is exhaling after holding itself rigid for too long. You move with the slow confidence of someone who has earned caution. That is one of the strange gifts of a storm. It strips away the silly belief that movement alone solves things. You no longer admire speed in the same way. You admire dry tinder, good socks, a horse that places its feet wisely, a stranger who knows the safer ford, a cup of hot broth, a roof that remains loyal through the night. And here on this thawing road, old survival habits begin to look strangely modern. One durable historical fact is that many practices developed for frontier winter travel shaped later approaches to organized transport, road maintenance, emergency planning, and cold weather preparedness. Clearing routes after storms, marking dangerous crossings, storing feed and fuel at intervals, checking on travelers, and repairing communication lines all became part of broader systems as railways, highways, telegraph networks, and later telephone lines expanded. The frontier did not simply vanish. Much of it became infrastructure. You pass a place where workers have cut a notch into a fallen log so sledges can be pulled through until someone brings a larger saw. It is temporary, rough, and effective. That is how many improvements begin. A bad crossing becomes a marked crossing. A resting place becomes a hut. A hut becomes a station becomes a village complains about taxes for road repair, which is also civilization, though less poetic. The telegraph wire still lies broken behind you, but people are already discussing repair. Someone will ride or walk the line. Someone will cut away the maple limb. Someone will splice the wire, test the current, and bring messages back into motion. In later generations, crews would do the same for telephone poles, power lines, railway signals, and buried cables. New technology changes the materials, but not the essential problem. Weather touches the system, and people must go out into the cold to mend it. There is an offbeat note from early railway winters that crews sometimes carried emergency stores along remote stretches, including shovels, lanterns, blankets, coal tools, and food, because a stalled train in snow or ice could become a little stranded village on wheels. Passengers who expected modern speed sometimes discovered that the old frontier had not retired. It was simply wearing a conductor's cap. The group pauses near a rise where the road overlooks a wider valley. Far below, a pale line suggests a newer route, perhaps a wagon road laid with more ambition. Perhaps the beginning of a railway grade, perhaps only a cleared track waiting for funding labour and better weather. You imagine future travellers moving faster through this landscape enclosed in carriages, trains, motorcars, buses, trucks, each generation believing it has finally escaped the old dangers. Then an ice storm arrives and suddenly everyone remembers friction, darkness, fuel communication shelter, and the ancient art of not driving into a ditch. Modern emergency kits are not so different from the frontier pack. Water, food that keeps, warm layers, fire or heat source, light, tools, first aid, a way to signal, a plan for delay. The packaging has changed, the logic has not. A flashlight replaces a lantern. Matches sit beside a lighter. Wool socks share space with foil blankets. A charged phone joins the map, though it should not replace it because little glowing rectangles become useless when batteries die or signals vanish. They are marvellous servants and very poor gods. Researchers still debate how much survival knowledge was preserved across generations, and how much had to be relearned whenever technology made people overconfident. Some argue that modern systems reduce risk so effectively that older habits naturally fade. Others point out that every major winter disaster reveals the same forgotten lessons. Stay with shelter when possible. Keep warm but dry. Avoid unnecessary travel. Conserve energy. Communicate clearly. And do not mistake a cleared sky for safety. The storm keeps repeating the lesson. Students keep changing. You walk on, and the horse flicks an ear as water drips from a branch onto its neck. It shivers once, then continues. The animal's quiet endurance reminds you that even modern transport depends on maintenance and care. Engines need fuel. Tyres need grip. Batteries need charge. Roads need clearing. Drivers need rest. Systems fail when people assume they're invisible. The frontier traveller knew dependency more directly. If the horse failed, you walked. If the fire failed, you froze. If the guide was ignored, you might lose the road. If food ran out, hunger became a decision maker. Modern life hides these dependencies under layers of service, but an ice storm peels some of those layers back. It asks almost gently what you actually have and who will help you when the line goes silent. At a fork, your temporary party divides. Two sledges take the valley road toward a settlement where smoke rises. The guide turns toward a higher track. You will continue with them for a while longer because the higher route remains safer after freezing rain. Farewells are brief. People who shared a storm rarely need dramatic words. A nod, a clasped hand, a warning to avoid the marsh, a wish for dry feet. That is enough. You watch the sledges descend slowly, runners scraping over ice patched with mud. The people aboard hunch into blankets, not heroic, just tired and continuing. They will tell the story differently by evening. So will you. The higher track leads through open ground where the thaw has begun to roughen the surface. Your boots find better grip. The horse walks more easily. Above, the sky breaks into pale blue strips. Sunlight catches the last ice along the branches and drops fall faster now, ticking like countless tiny clocks. You think about how survival advice travels, from guide to traveller, parent to child, neighbour to stranger, diary to reader. disaster report to regulation, folklore to checklist. A warning once spoken beside a smoky post may eventually become a rule, printed in a railway manual or a notice on a mountain road. Carry blankets, watch the weather, do not cross flooded ice, keep animals fed, check on the vulnerable, mark the dangerous place so the next person sees it sooner. That last part matters most. Survival knowledge becomes humane when it is left behind for others. A blaze on a tree, a cairn near a safe ford, a note at a station, a repaired wire, a cleared branch, a story told with enough detail to be useful. The old frontier was harsh, but it was not empty of care. Care simply had to move through rough materials. As afternoon leans toward evening, the road becomes steadier. You can smell thawing earth under the ice now dark and mineral. The world is slowly returning to ordinary, though not fully. The storm remains in broken branches, in damp socks, in sore fingers, in delayed messages, in feed measured carefully at posts. Ordinary returns by labour not magic. You continue along the ridge carrying lessons that feel older than the road and still perfectly current. Notice early. Stop wisely. Stay dry. Feed the body. Trust local knowledge. Respect animals. Share warnings. Keep fire possible. Keep humility close. The ice drips from the branches like the last notes of a fading song, and you walk beneath it with a quieter mind, understanding that the past is not behind you tonight. It is under your boots, in your pack, beside you, in the horse's steady breath, and ahead in every winter road that still asks travellers to remember. The road grows quieter as the day thins into evening, and the last of the ice begins surrendering its grip on the branches above you. Drops fall at irregular intervals, soft and patient, as if the storm is unlearning itself one small piece at a time. You walk beneath that slow unravelling, your steps steadier now, your body carrying the memory of cold without quite fearing it in the same way. The guide eventually turns off toward another path, offering a final nod and a reminder about the marsh beyond the next ridge. You thank them, and this time the words feel more complete. Not large, not ceremonial, but anchored in understanding. Then you continue alone again, though not in the same way you were alone at the beginning. The horse walks beside you calmer now, its breath no longer rushing in sharp clouds, but settling into a steady rhythm. The land opens slightly, revealing a stretch of ground where the ice has melted enough to show patches of earth beneath. Dark soil, soft edges, the first hint that the world is capable of changing its mind. A grounded historical observation is that many frontier travellers measured success not by how far they went, but by how well they adapted to what the journey demanded. Distance mattered, of course, but survival depended on adjustment. Plans bent, routes shifted, expectations lowered and then rebuilt. The journey was never just forward. It was sideways, backward, paused and resumed. You feel that now in the way you move. You do not rush the clearer ground. You do not trust it entirely either. You step, test, breathe. The same rhythm as before, but softer, less tense. Experience has settled into your muscles. There is a quiet, almost amusing detail from some travel accounts, where people after surviving a difficult storm would immediately begin preparing for the next one, drying gear, repairing straps, checking supplies, even while the sky cleared above them. It might seem excessive, but it reflects a simple truth. The frontier did not offer long periods of certainty. Preparation was not a phase, it was a habit. The light fades into a gentle grey, then into the deeper blue of approaching night. But this night feels different, not empty, not threatening in the same way. You have shelter ahead even if you cannot yet see it. You have knowledge carried from each step behind you. The road is no longer an unknown line, it is a series of remembered choices. Interpretations vary among historians about whether frontier survival should be understood as resilience, endurance, adaptation, or simply necessity. Perhaps it is all of these at once. The labels matter less than the actions themselves. Notice, adjust, continue. The language may change, but the practice remains. You reach a small rise and stop looking back. The land behind you glows faintly under the last light. The trees still holding traces of ice, the road winding through it like a quiet thought. Somewhere beyond those trees lies the burned shelter, the hollow, the creek, the trading posts, the broken wire, the gathered people, the stories, the work. It feels distant now, not because it is far, but because you have moved through it. You turn forward again. The path ahead leads toward darker ground, but you no longer feel the same hesitation. The storm has taught you how to read the silence, how to listen to the small sounds, how to trust the slow pace over the urgent one. You carry those lessons without effort now, like the weight of your pack or the warmth of your coat. And as the final light fades, the world softens. The edges blur, the sounds quiet. Your steps become slower, more deliberate, then gradually less distinct. The road is still there, but it no longer demands your full attention. It simply exists, waiting. You find a place to rest, not a dramatic shelter, not a grand arrival. Just a quiet space where the ground is steady, the wind is low, and the night feels calm. You settle there, the horse nearby, the last of your warmth gathered close. The fire, if you make one, is small and gentle, its light barely touching the edges of the dark. And now the story begins to slow. The road fades into memory. The ice becomes distant. The sounds of the storm soften into something almost like breathing. You no longer need to listen so carefully. You no longer need to watch every step. You are safe enough. The warmth you have carried from fire, from food, from shared spaces, from careful choices settles around you. The cold is still out there somewhere beyond the edges of your awareness, but it no longer presses in. It simply exists, part of the larger world that you have learned to move through. Your breath slows. The rhythm of your body matches the quiet of the night. The tension in your shoulders eases. Your hands rest no longer searching for warmth, because warmth has found you. And the road which once demanded so much now asks for nothing. It stretches on somewhere beyond your sight, continuing as it always has, carrying other travellers, other stories, other small acts of survival. But for you in this moment, it becomes something else. A memory, a lesson, a gentle fading line that leads not forward, but inward. You close your eyes. The last sounds of the frontier drift away. The soft fall of melting ice. The distant creak of trees settling. The quiet breath of the horse nearby. The faint echo of voices from warm rooms now far behind. Everything softens. Everything slows. And the long journey through cold and silence becomes still like a story finally reaching its end. Word count 1062. The night settles fully, now wrapping the world in a quiet that feels deep and steady. You rest there, not thinking about the road behind or the path ahead, but simply existing in the calm that follows effort. The cold is distant, the warmth remains. Your breathing becomes slow, even almost rhythmic, like the gentle rise and fall of something far away. The small fire fades into embers glowing softly, then dimming, then glowing again, as if it too is drifting toward rest. The land no longer feels harsh, it feels still. And in that stillness there is comfort. You are no longer moving through the storm, you are beyond it. The ice, the wind, the uncertainty, all of it has passed into memory, leaving behind only the quiet understanding that you made it through. There is nothing left to do now. No decisions to make, no steps to take, only rest. And as you drift further into that calm, the story itself begins to fade its edges, softening its details, blending into a gentle, distant warmth. The road disappears, the cold disappears. Even the sense of time loosens, becoming less important, less defined. You're simply here in this quiet place where everything has slowed enough to let you rest completely. And with that final softness, the story lets go, leaving you in a peaceful, steady silence. Sweet dreams!